The flower hit the dirt floor with a heavy thud, right beside her bloodied hands. Lian Hua knelt there, gathering scattered silk threads while the entire town watched her humiliation. They'd laughed when Caleb kicked her work across the room, called her worthless, foreign trash. She'd crossed an ocean for this, to be spit on in a place that promised freedom. Then boots, heavy ones, a shadow that made the room go quiet. This is the story of how one act of respect shattered a town's cruelty, and how a woman nobody wanted became the one nobody could forget. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The door to McCready's general store hung crooked on its hinges, scraping the warped floorboards every time someone pushed through. It was the kind of sound that set Lian Hua's teeth on edge, a grinding, protesting noise that reminded her of everything broken in this place, including, perhaps, herself. She stood near the back counter, her leather satchel clutched against her ribs like armor. Inside were 3 pieces of embroidery, silk panels she'd worked by candlelight for the past 2 weeks, her fingers bleeding through the final stitches. Phoenix rising through clouds. Peonies in full bloom. A mountain landscape that looked nothing like these harsh Dakota hills, but reminded her of home in ways that made her chest ache. The store smelled of tobacco, old leather, and something vaguely rotten she couldn't identify. Probably the barrels of salted pork near the window, or maybe just the accumulated stink of men who bathed once a month if the creek wasn't frozen. "What's she doing here again?" The voice came from somewhere to her left. Lian Hua didn't turn. She'd learned that turning, acknowledging, giving any sign you heard them, it only made things worse. "Probably begging," another voice answered. Laughter rippled through the small crowd of men gathered near the stove. "That's all they do, ain't it? Beg and steal." Her English was good enough to understand every word. Sometimes she wished it wasn't. The storekeeper, a thin man named McCready with a perpetually suspicious squint, stood behind the counter counting coins with the concentration of a jeweler. He hadn't looked up since she entered, hadn't acknowledged her presence at all. Lian Hua waited. Patience was something she'd learned young, not the peaceful kind, but the survival kind. The patience of knowing when to speak and when silence was the only shield you had. "Mr. McCready," she finally said, her voice quiet but clear. "I have work. Quality work. I trade for food." That got his attention. He glanced up, his eyes traveling from her face to the satchel, then back again. His expression didn't change much, just a slight downturn at the corners of his mouth. "I don't need decorations," he said flatly. "Not decorations." She reached into the satchel, pulling out the Phoenix panel. The silk caught the weak afternoon light streaming through the dirty window, crimson and gold threads shimmering like real flame. "Art, Eastern silk, very valuable. In San Francisco, this sells for—" "We ain't in San Francisco." McCready cut her off with the kind of certainty that came from never having been more than 50 miles from where he was born. "And I don't need art. I need customers who can pay in actual money." "I pay," Lian Hua insisted, though they both knew that wasn't quite true. She had 47 cents left from selling her mother's jade bracelet 3 months ago. 47 cents wouldn't buy enough flour to last a week. "I pay with craft, with skill." "With garbage, you mean?" The new voice cut through the store like a blade. Lian Hua's stomach dropped before she even turned around. Caleb Rourke stood in the doorway, backlit by the harsh afternoon sun, so his face was mostly shadow. But she didn't need to see his face to know the expression. She'd seen it often enough. Contempt, amusement. The particular kind of cruelty that came easy to men who'd never been challenged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of sun-weathered face that made him look both older and meaner than his 30-odd years. His hat sat low on his head, and his hands rested on his belt in that casual way men did when they wanted you to notice the gun holstered there. "Nobody wants your Chinaman trinkets," Caleb said, stepping fully into the store. His boots were loud on the floor, deliberate, territorial. "Hell, nobody wants you. When you gonna figure that out?" The other men shifted, their attention now fully focused on the unfolding scene. This was entertainment, better than cards, better than whiskey gossip. Watching someone get torn down was free, and it made them feel bigger by comparison. Lian Hua kept her expression neutral. Show nothing. Give nothing. "I have skill," she repeated, hating how small her voice sounded. I work hard. I ask only fair trade. Fair, Caleb laughed, a harsh barking sound. You think anything about you is fair? You come here, to our town, bringing your foreign nonsense, taking up space. I take nothing, Lian Hua interrupted, and immediately regretted it. Caleb's face darkened. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was right there, looming over her. She was not a small woman, 5'6", strong from years of farm work back in Guangdong, but Caleb made her feel tiny, crushable. You take air, he said quietly, and somehow the quiet was worse than shouting. You take water from our wells. You exist where you don't belong. That's theft enough. Someone near the stove snickered. McCready said nothing, just went back to counting his coins. Lianhua's hands tightened on the silk panel. Don't respond. Don't give him the reaction he wants. Let me see that. Caleb reached out and snatched the embroidery from her hands before she could react. He held it up, squinting at it with exaggerated scrutiny. This is what you think is valuable? Looks like something a child did. My daughter could stitch better than this, and she's 8. Your daughter cannot read, Lianhua said before she could stop herself. I see her. She signs her name with an X. The store went very quiet. Caleb's face flushed red. For a moment, just a moment, Lianhua saw real rage there, the kind that preceded violence. You got a smart mouth for someone who ought to be grateful we let you breathe, he said softly. Then, almost casually, he tossed the silk panel onto the floor. It landed in a patch of dirt and tobacco juice near the stove. Oops, Caleb said. Something inside Lianhua cracked. Not broke. She'd been broken before. She knew what that felt like. This was different. This was the sound of the last thread of dignity straining to hold. She knelt down, reaching for the panel. Look at that, Caleb said to his audience. On her knees. That's where she belongs, ain't it? Where all of them belong. Laughter. Not everyone, McCready looked uncomfortable, and one young man near the window looked away. But enough. Enough to make it clear this was acceptable, normal, just the way things were. Lianhua picked up the panel. The silk was smudged now, dirt ground into the delicate threads. 2 weeks of work, 2 weeks of eye strain by candlelight, of pricked fingers and aching shoulders. She reached for the second panel still in her satchel. Caleb's boot came down on her hand. Not hard enough to break bones. He was too smart for that, too aware of where the line was, but hard enough to pin her there, hard enough to make his point. Leave it, he said. Whatever garbage you got in there, leave it. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and don't come back here thinking you're people. You ain't. You're just taking up space that belongs to real Americans. Her hand hurt. Her pride hurt worse. Lianhua looked up at him, this man who'd decided her worth based on the shape of her eyes and the color of her skin, and she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Hatred. Pure, clean, clarifying hatred. Move your foot, she said quietly. Make me. They stared at each other. The store was so quiet Lianhua could hear the wind rattling the loose boards outside. Then footsteps. Heavy ones. The kind that made the floorboards creak in protest. Every head in the store turned toward the door. The man who ducked through the entrance had to turn sideways to fit his shoulders through the frame. He was massive. Not fat, but built like something carved from the mountains themselves. 6.5 feet easy, with shoulders that strained the seams of his worn canvas coat. His beard was thick and dark, shot through with gray, and his eyes were the color of winter sky. Elias Vance. Lianhua had seen him before from a distance. Everyone in Harmony Creek knew Elias, the mountain man who came down from his cabin twice a year for supplies and spoke to almost no one. There were stories about him, that he'd been a soldier once, that he'd killed a grizzly with a knife, that he'd lost a wife and child to scarlet fever and chosen the wilderness over company ever since. Looking at him now, Lianhua believed all of it. He moved through the store with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate small spaces despite his size. His eyes swept the room once, taking in the scene, Caleb's boot on Lianhua's hand, her kneeling position, the smudged silk on the floor, but his expression didn't change. He walked past all of them without a word, heading straight for the counter. Elias, McCready said, straightening up with obvious relief at the distraction. Didn't expect you till next month. Ran low on salt, Elias said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse. And coffee. Sure. Let me get that for you. Caleb still hadn't moved his boot. He was watching Elias now, something calculating in his expression. Testing, maybe. Seeing if the mountain man would care about what was happening 5 feet away. Elias didn't even glance over. Lianhua's heart sank. Of course he wouldn't care. Why would he? She was nothing to him, nothing to anyone here. She tried to pull her hand free. Caleb pressed down harder, grinding her knuckles against the floorboards. Where you think you're going? He murmured. McCready returned with a sack of salt and a tin of coffee. That'll be $4 even. Elias reached into his coat, pulled out a worn leather purse, and counted out the coins with methodical precision. Then he paused, looking at something behind the counter. That flour, he said. 20-pound sack. Add it on. Sure thing. McCready hauled the sack up onto the counter with a grunt. That's another $3. More coins. Elias gathered his purchases, tucking them into the canvas pack he carried. Then he turned toward the door. He had to walk right past Lianhua to get there. She didn't look up. Couldn't bear to see the same indifference in his eyes that she'd seen in everyone else's. Elias's boot stopped, right next to her. For a long moment, nothing happened. The store held its breath. Then Elias set down his pack. He straightened up to his full height, which put him a solid 6 inches taller than Caleb, and turned to face the other man. Move, he said quietly. It wasn't a request. Caleb's smile faltered. This ain't your business, Vance. Didn't ask if it was. Said move. You defending a Chinaman now? Caleb's voice rose, trying to pull the room back onto his side. That what you come down from your mountain for? To protect... Don't care what she is, Elias interrupted. Care that you're in my way. It was brilliant, really. He wasn't defending her, wasn't making it about justice or righteousness or any of the things that might make him look weak or sympathetic. He was just claiming space, asserting dominance the way mountains did, by simply being immovable. Caleb's jaw worked. Lianhua could see the calculation happening. Was this worth it? Was making his point about her worth going up against Elias Vance? Apparently not. He lifted his boot. She ain't worth it anyway. Probably not, Elias agreed, which shouldn't have stung but did. Move aside. Caleb stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. Hell, Elias, didn't mean to rile you. Just having a bit of fun. Elias didn't respond. He reached down. Lianhua flinched despite herself and picked up the soiled silk panel from the floor. He looked at it for a moment, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle on the delicate fabric. Then he walked back to the counter and set it down in front of McCready. How much? He asked. McCready blinked. For that? For this. How much would you pay? Elias, I already told her. I don't need... Didn't ask what you need. Asked what it's worth. The storekeeper shifted uncomfortably. Everyone was watching now, trying to figure out what game Elias was playing. I suppose $2? McCready offered weakly. If it was clean, which it ain't now. Was clean when she brought it in, Elias said. Before Rourke here decided to redecorate your floor with it. So I figure you owe her $2 plus apology for allowing your customers to damage merchandise on your property. McCready's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. I ain't paying for... he started. Elias reached into his own purse and pulled out $2 silver. He set them on the counter with 2 solid clinks. There, sir, he said. I'm buying it. From her. Direct transaction, no store involved. He turned and looked at Lianhua for the first time. His eyes were pale blue, startling in his weathered face, and utterly unreadable. $2 fair? He asked. Lianhua's throat was tight. She managed a nod. Good. He picked up the flour sack he'd purchased, 20 pounds of it, enough to feed one person for a month, and walked over to where she still knelt. He set it down beside her. Not in her hands, beside her. On the floor, where she could claim it or not, as she chose. Flour's yours too, he said. Consider it a trade. Your work for my supply. I cannot, Lianhua started, her voice cracking. Wasn't asking. Elias picked up his own pack. You got hands. You got skill. That's worth something. He walked to the door, ducked through it, and was gone. The store erupted the moment he left. What the hell was that about? Someone demanded. Elias Vance defending a Chinaman? Never thought I'd see. He didn't defend her, Caleb cut in, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. He just wanted her out of his way. You heard him, said she probably wasn't worth it. But the damage was done. The dynamic had shifted. Lian Hua wasn't just the foreign woman they could kick around anymore. She was someone Elias Vance had acknowledged, someone he'd paid for. That meant something in Harmony Creek, whether anyone wanted to admit it or not. Lian Hua slowly got to her feet. Her hand throbbed where Caleb's boot had pinned it, but nothing felt broken. She gathered the silk panel, ruined now, probably unsalvageable, and tucked it back into her satchel. Then she picked up the flour sack. 20 pounds. It was heavy. Good. The $2 still sat on the counter. McCready hadn't touched them. Lianhua walked over and claimed them. She met McCready's eyes as she did, daring him to object. He didn't. She turned toward the door. Every eye in the store followed her, but no one spoke. No one stopped her. As she stepped out into the harsh afternoon light, she heard Caleb's voice behind her, trying to reclaim his authority. Don't matter what Vance thinks, she's still nothing. Still don't belong. Maybe. But nothing didn't walk out of McCready's general store with flour and silver. Nothing didn't make Caleb Rourke back down. Lian Hua adjusted the heavy sack against her hip and started the long walk back to her shelter on the edge of the wilderness. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the Dakota sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded her painfully of the silk she'd just lost. But she had flour now, and $2. And something else, something she hadn't felt in the 3 months since arriving in Harmony Creek. Possibility. The shelter Lian Hua called home was barely worthy of the name. It was a lean-to she'd constructed from scavenged lumber and canvas, tucked into a grove of cottonwoods about 2 miles from town. Not far enough to feel safe from Harmony Creek's cruelty, but far enough that she didn't have to see it every day. The structure was 12 feet long and maybe 8 feet deep, open on one side with a fire pit dug just outside the canvas flap. She'd lined the interior with pine boughs for insulation and waterproofing, but the November cold still crept through every gap. At night, frost formed on the inside of the canvas. She'd chosen this spot for the creek that ran nearby, clear water, reliable through 3 seasons. Come winter, she'd have to break ice to fill her buckets, but that was a problem for later. For now, the creek meant survival. Lianhua set the flour sack down inside the shelter, next to the small pile of supplies she'd managed to accumulate. A cast iron pot with a crack in the bottom that still held water. If you were careful, a tin cup, 2 wool blankets she'd bought off a departing homesteader for 50 cents, a bag of dried beans, and the small wooden chest that held everything she'd carried from San Francisco. The chest had been her mother's. Inside were 3 more embroidered panels, a packet of needles and thread, a small bronze mirror, and a bundle of letters written in characters most people in Harmony Creek would think were decorative symbols rather than words. She opened the chest and pulled out the mirror. Her reflection looked back at her, and she barely recognized the woman she saw. Her face was thinner than it had been 3 months ago, cheekbones too prominent, eyes shadowed with fatigue. Her hair, which she usually kept in a neat bun, had come partially loose during the encounter at the store. Streaks of dirt smudged her forehead. She looked like what she was, desperate, worn down, nearly broken. Lianhua set the mirror aside and built up the fire. The wood was damp from last night's frost, so it took time to catch, but eventually she coaxed a flame to life. As the fire grew, she filled her cracked pot with water from the creek and set it to boil. While the water heated, she examined her hand where Caleb's boot had pinned it. The skin was scraped raw across the knuckles, already darkening into a bruise. She'd had worse. In the silk factories back in Guangdong, injuries like this were hourly occurrences. But those injuries had come from work, from the machines she'd operated 12 hours a day, from the brutal pace of production. They'd meant something: wages, survival, a path forward. This bruise meant nothing except that men like Caleb Rourke existed and they would hurt you just because they could. The water boiled. Lian Hua measured out a small handful of beans, not as many as she wanted, but enough to stretch the flour for another week, and added them to the pot. As they cooked, she sat cross-legged by the fire and let herself think about what had happened. Elias Vance. She didn't know what to make of him. The story said he avoided people, preferred his mountain solitude to company, yet he'd stepped in. Why? Don't care what she is, he'd said. Care that you're in my way. Not a rescue, then. Just territorial assertion. Which shouldn't have meant anything, except it did. It had stopped Caleb. It had gotten her flour and silver when she'd had neither. But now what? Lianhua had learned young that kindness often came with expectations. In the factories, a supervisor's generosity meant he expected you to work double shifts without complaint. In San Francisco, when a merchant helped you with credit, he expected repayment with interest that would keep you in debt for years. What did Elias expect? He'd said the flour was a trade for her work, but he hadn't taken the embroidery. It still sat in her satchel, ruined and worthless. She'd have to return it. That's what honor required. If someone gave you something under false pretenses, you corrected the mistake. The beans finished cooking. Lianhua ate them slowly, mechanically, tasting nothing. Food was fuel now, not pleasure. Pleasure was for people who had enough to waste on preferences. As night fell and the temperature dropped, she wrapped herself in both blankets and lay down on the pine boughs. The fire crackled outside the shelter, its warmth barely reaching her, but it was light, and that mattered. Darkness out here wasn't just absence of sun. It was absolute, consuming. The kind of darkness that made you understand why people feared the night. She thought about her mother, who'd sold the jade bracelet to buy Lianhua's passage to America. Gold Mountain, they'd called it back home. The land of opportunity where streets were supposedly paved with fortune. Her mother had died 2 months after Lianhua left. The letter had reached her in San Francisco, 3 months after the burial. Your mother proud, her cousin had written in broken characters. Say you make good life. So far, the good life looked like a lean-to in Dakota territory, eating beans by a struggling fire while nursing bruises from men who thought her existence was theft. But she was alive. That counted for something. Lianhua closed her eyes and listened to the night sounds. Wind in the cottonwoods, the creek burbling over stones, something small and quick moving through the underbrush. Not hostile sounds, just alive. Tomorrow she'd go to Elias Vance's cabin and return what he was owed, the truth that his trade had been based on damaged goods. She'd offer to work off the debt somehow, cleaning, mending, whatever he needed. It was the honorable thing to do. It was also terrifying, but that didn't change the necessity. Sleep came eventually, restless and thin. In her dreams, she was back in Guangdong, working the silk looms with her mother beside her. The rhythmic clack of the machinery was soothing, familiar, purposeful. She woke to frost on the canvas and the sun barely breaking the horizon. Time to face the mountain. Finding Elias Vance's cabin wasn't difficult. Everyone knew it was up in the foothills about 5 miles northwest of town, accessible by a rough trail that required more determination than skill. The difficult part was gathering the courage to actually make the journey. Lianhua stood outside her shelter in the weak morning light, the ruined silk panel wrapped carefully in clean cloth and tucked under her arm. She'd eaten a small breakfast of flour mixed with water and cooked into something resembling bread, more paste than sustenance, but it would keep her going for the hike. The trail started just past Miller's abandoned claim, a homestead that had failed within 6 months, leaving behind a collapsed sod house and a dry well. Lianhua had scavenged what she could from it when she first arrived, finding the canvas that now served as her shelter roof. She followed the narrow path as it climbed into the hills. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of day where your breath hung in the air like smoke and every sound carried for miles. Above her, a hawk circled, riding thermals with lazy precision. The land here was different from Guangdong's green mountains and terraced fields. This was hard country, all stone and scrub grass, sparse trees clinging to rocky soil. Beautiful in its own harsh way, but unforgiving. The kind of place that killed you if you made mistakes. After an hour of steady climbing, the trail leveled out into a small valley. And there, set back against a cliff face with a view over the foothills, was Elias Vance's cabin. It was solidly built, not large, maybe 20 feet square, but constructed with the kind of care that spoke of permanence. Proper logs, chinked tight against the wind. A stone chimney that rose straight and true. A covered porch with firewood stacked in neat cords beneath the eaves. Smoke rose from the chimney. He was home. Lianhua's courage wavered. What was she doing here? She didn't know this man, didn't owe him anything except honesty, which could be delivered from a distance or through someone else. But no, that was cowardice. She'd come this far. She approached the cabin slowly, making no effort to hide her footsteps. Surprising a mountain man in his own home seemed like a good way to get shot. Before she reached the porch, the door opened. Elias filled the doorway, still massive in the morning light. He wore the same canvas coat from yesterday, and his beard looked like it hadn't seen a comb in weeks. In his hand was a rifle, not pointed at her, just held casually at his side. "Figured you might show up," he said. That surprised her. "You did? Saw it in your eyes yesterday, the kind of person who returns what they think they owe." He leaned the rifle against the doorframe. "You walked all the way up here to give back the flower?" "Not the flower." Lian Hua held out the wrapped package. "The trade was false. This silk, it is ruined. You paid for something worth nothing now. I cannot accept payment for worthless work." Elias looked at the package but didn't take it. "I bought what I wanted to buy." "But it is damaged. You did not see." "I saw. Saw Rourke throw it in the dirt, saw exactly what I was buying. Then why'd I buy damaged goods?" Elias scratched his beard, considering. "Let me ask you something. When you made that, how long did it take?" 2 weeks, maybe more. "And before Rourke ruined it, was it good work?" Lian Hua's pride answered before her humility could stop it. "Yes, very good." "Then that's what I paid for. The work, the skill. What happened to it after ain't your fault, but you have nothing for your silver. I have the satisfaction of watching Caleb Rourke squirm, which is worth $2 any day." Elias stepped aside from the doorway. "You walked 5 miles uphill to tell me something I already knew. Least I can do is offer coffee." "You drink coffee." Lian Hua hesitated. Entering a man's cabin alone, that violated every warning her mother had ever given her, but she'd already violated most of those warnings just by coming to America. What was one more? "Yes," she said. "I drink coffee." The cabin's interior was sparse but meticulously organized. A single room with a sleeping area in one corner, a cooking area with a proper iron stove in another, a workbench covered in various tools and partially assembled traps along the far wall. Furs hung from the rafters: fox, beaver, what looked like wolf. The place smelled of wood smoke, leather, and coffee. Elias poured 2 cups from a pot that sat on the stove, handing her one in a tin cup that matched her own back at the shelter. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and real. "Sit if you want," he said, gesturing to one of 2 rough-hewn chairs near the stove. Lian Hua sat, wrapping her hands around the cup for warmth. Elias took the other chair, his large frame making the furniture look childlike. For a long moment they sat in silence. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with all the things neither of them was saying. Finally, Elias spoke. "How long you been in Harmony Creek?" 3 months. "And in that lean-to by the cottonwoods?" She nodded, unsurprised he knew where she lived. In a town this small, everyone knew everything. "That won't hold through winter," he said flatly. "First real blizzard will collapse it." "I know." Lian Hua took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness coat her tongue. "I am working on alternatives." "What kind of alternatives?" "I thought perhaps I could find work, save money, build something stronger before snow comes." "What kind of work?" Elias's tone wasn't mocking, just curious. "You seen anyone in town willing to hire you?" No, she hadn't. That was the problem. "I have skills," she said instead. "I can sew, cook, clean. In Guangdong, I worked silk looms. In San Francisco, I worked laundries. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Didn't say you were. But hard work don't mean much if nobody'll give you a chance at it." The truth of that settled over her like a weight. Lian Hua set her coffee down carefully. "Then I will build it myself," she said. "The cabin. I learn. I work. I survive." Elias studied her over his own cup. Those pale blue eyes were unsettling, too knowing, too direct. "You know how to build a cabin?" he asked. "No, but I can learn." "You know how to cut trees, notch logs, set a foundation?" "No, but you got tools? Saw, axe, drill?" "I will get them." "With what money?" Lian Hua's jaw tightened. I will find a way. That's not a plan. That's hope. Hope don't build cabins. She stood abruptly, setting the cup down with more force than intended. Why did you bring me here? To tell me what I already know. That I am alone, that I have nothing, that I will probably die when winter comes? I know these things. I do not need you to... I'm offering to help. That stopped her. Lianhua stared at him. Elias set down his own cup and leaned back in his chair. I got tools. I got timber nearby. I got knowledge. You got, what did you call it? Work ethic, skill, determination. I do not understand. I'm saying we build you a cabin, together, partnership. Why? The question came out more suspicious than she intended. What do you want? Want? Elias considered. I want to not watch someone freeze to death because this town's too stupid and mean to help. I want to use the skills I got before I get too old to use them. And I want some damn company that ain't my own thoughts for a change. He paused. That honest enough for you? Lianhua didn't know what to say. In her experience, men didn't help women without expecting something. And that something usually involved degradation or ownership. I cannot pay you, she said carefully. Didn't ask you to. I cannot. I will not. She struggled to find words that weren't insulting. There are things I will not do, no matter how much I need help. Understanding dawned in Elias's eyes. You think I'm offering this to... Jesus. No, that ain't... He stood up, suddenly looking uncomfortable. I had a wife, Sarah, and a daughter, Emma. They died 8 years ago. Fever. Since then, I ain't had any interest in... That ain't what this is. Then what is it? It's one person with skills and another person with need, figuring out how to help each other without making it complicated. He met her eyes. You help me build it. Learn as we go. When it's done, it's yours. No debt, no obligation, just people being people instead of animals. Lianhua wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it scared her. Why me? She asked quietly. You do not know me. I am nobody to you. You're somebody who's trying to survive in a place that don't want you to, Elias said. I respect that. Respect's worth something. Respect. The word hit her harder than Caleb's boot had. When was the last time anyone had said they respected her? When was the last time someone had seen her as something other than foreign, other, wrong? If I say yes, she said slowly, I work. I do not take charity. Wouldn't offer it. I learn everything. Every step. I do not stand aside while you build. Wouldn't let you. And when it is finished, you leave. You do not try to own what we build together. Elias nodded. When it's finished, it's yours. I go back to my mountain. You got my word on that. His word. She had no reason to trust it except the look in his eyes and the fact that he'd stepped up in McCready's store when no one else had. Sometimes that was all you had to work with. Then yes. Lianhua said. I say yes. They shook on it, his hand swallowing hers, rough as bark but surprisingly gentle. The gesture felt formal. Binding. We start tomorrow, Elias said. Sunrise. I'll meet you at your camp with tools. Wear clothes you can ruin. All my clothes I can ruin. He almost smiled. Then wear the ones you mind losing least. Elias arrived at dawn leading a mule loaded with tools. Axes, saws, hammers, chisels, a leather bag full of iron nails that must have cost a fortune. He also brought a surveying level and something he called a plumb line. First thing we do, he said, unloading the mule with efficient movements, is find the right spot. You picked this location for the creek, which is smart. Water's essential. But we need flat ground, good drainage, close to timber. He walked the area around her lean-to, occasionally kneeling to test the soil or site along various angles. Finally, he pointed to a spot about 50 yards from the creek, slightly elevated on a small rise. There. Good sight lines. You can see anyone coming from town. High enough the spring floods won't reach you. Soil's rocky, which is bad for farming but good for foundation. Together, they cleared the site, removing brush, rocks, small trees. It was hard work. Lianhua's back ached within an hour, but she pushed through it. Elias watched her struggle with a stubborn juniper root and didn't offer to help until she'd been at it for 20 minutes. Use the leverage, he finally said. Don't pull straight up, Rock it back and forth, work it loose. She adjusted her approach. The root came free. There you go, Elias said, and went back to his own work. By midday, they had a cleared space roughly 20 feet square. Elias used the level and string to mark out the foundation, driving stakes at each corner and running lines between them. Cabin will be 16 by 16, he explained. Any smaller, you'll go crazy. Any bigger, you'll burn too much wood trying to heat it come winter. They broke for lunch, bread and dried venison Elias had brought. As they ate, Lianhua studied the marked-out space. How long? She asked. To build? 6 weeks if weather holds, 8 if it don't. We got maybe a month before snow, so we'll have to work fast. Might not finish before winter, which means you'll need to stay in your lean-to a bit longer. But we get the walls up and the roof on, you can move in and finish the inside while the weather's bad. And you will teach me? Every step. By the time this is done, you'll know how to build a cabin without me. The afternoon was spent cutting timber. Elias taught her to read trees, which ones were straight enough for logs, which were too twisted, how to check for rot by examining the bark and listening to the sound the trunk made when you hit it with an axe. Pine's easiest to work with, he said, but cottonwood's what we got most of, so that's what we'll use. It's softer, which means it won't last as long, but it'll do. They felled 3 trees that first day. Or rather, Elias felled 2 and talked her through the third. The process was terrifying, calculating the fall angle, cutting the notch, making the back cut, then running as the tree groaned and toppled with a crash that shook the ground. When her tree fell exactly where Elias had predicted, Lianhua felt something she hadn't felt in months. Accomplishment. Not survival, not scraping by, actual accomplishment. Good cut, Elias said, examining the stump. Clean, controlled. Those 2 words of praise meant more than they should have. By sunset, they'd stripped the branches from all 3 trees and cut them into 16-foot lengths. Lianhua's hands were covered in blisters, her shoulders screaming, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Elias noticed. That's enough for today. Go eat something, rest. We'll start again tomorrow. He left as efficiently as he'd arrived, taking the mule but leaving the tools under a canvas tarp near the building site. Lianhua collapsed beside her fire and ate cold beans straight from the pot because she was too tired to reheat them. Her whole body hurt. But it was the good kind of hurt, the kind that came from purpose. She fell asleep before full dark, too exhausted even to dream. The days developed a rhythm. Elias arrived at sunrise. They worked until noon, broke for lunch, worked until the light failed. Sometimes they cut timber. Sometimes they dragged logs to the site using the mule and a complicated system of ropes Elias called a snatch block. Sometimes they notched the logs, cutting careful joints that would lock together without nails. Elias talked while they worked, not constantly, but enough to teach. He explained why you soaked logs before peeling bark. Comes off easier and it draws out the sap that attracts insects. He showed her how to read wood grain to predict how a log would behave as it dried. He taught her to drive nails at a slight angle so they'd hold better. Carpentry ain't magic, he said one afternoon as they fitted a particularly stubborn log into place. It's just paying attention. Wood tells you what it wants to do. Your job is to listen. Lianhua listened. She learned. By the end of the first week, they had the foundation laid, flat stones set into the ground to keep the bottom logs from rotting. By the end of the second week, the walls were waist high. By the third week, they were above her head. The work was brutal, but Lianhua had spent years in factories. She knew how to push her body past what it thought were limits. The blisters on her hands burst and bled and calloused over. Her shoulders stopped screaming and started just aching steadily. She got better at judging the weight of logs, the swing of the axe, the angle of the saw. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, people started to notice. The first was old Sam Miller, who ran the livery. He rode out one afternoon with a wagon load of hay and stopped to watch them work. "Elias," he called. "What are you building?" "Cabin," Elias said, not stopping his work. "For who?" "For Miss Lian." Sam sat there for a long minute, chewing tobacco and considering. Finally, he spat and said, "Huh. Well, good luck with that." He rode off. But 2 days later, his teenage son showed up with a window frame, just one, salvaged from somewhere, but with real glass still intact. "Pa said you might could use this," the boy mumbled, not quite looking at Lianhua. He set it down and left before either of them could respond. Then came Martha Hendricks, the preacher's wife, with a basket of apples. "I heard about your project," she said carefully. "Thought you might appreciate some food that ain't beans." Lianhua accepted these apples with a bow that made Martha uncomfortable. "Thank you," she said. "This is kind." "It's just apples," Martha said quickly, as if kindness was something to be embarrassed about. "We had extra." But they kept coming, a door hinge from the blacksmith, a bag of cornmeal from the widow Thompson, scraps of oilcloth from the dry goods store, good for waterproofing. Not everyone, of course. Caleb and his circle stayed hostile, but enough people, enough to make Lianhua realize that maybe, not everyone in Harmony Creek was determined to watch her fail. "Why are they doing this?" she asked Elias one evening as they inventoried their supplies. "Guilt, maybe," he said, "or shame at how you've been treated. Or maybe they're just remembering that they're human." He shrugged. "Don't matter why. Matters that they're doing it." The fourth week brought the first real cold snap. They worked through it, their breath fogging in the air, hands going numb despite heavy gloves. The walls reached full height, 8 logs tall, with spaces left for the window and door. "Next comes the hardest part," Elias said. "The roof." He taught her to build the gable ends first, cutting shorter logs and stacking them in a triangular shape that would support the roof ridge. Then came the roof beams, long, straight timbers that spanned the width of the cabin and had to be lifted into place. This required help. Elias recruited 2 men from town, reluctant volunteers who clearly didn't want to be there but owed Elias favors. Together, the 4 of them hoisted the beams into position and secured them with wooden pegs. "No nails in the roof structure," Elias explained. "Nails rust. Pegs swell when they get wet. Hold tighter." Once the beams were up, they laid planks across them and covered the planks with layers of tar paper and sod. The sod roof would keep the cabin cool in summer and insulated in winter. By the end of the 5th week, the cabin had walls and a roof. It still needed a door, proper chinking between the logs, a floor, a stove, but it was recognizable as a home. Lianhua stood inside the empty space one evening after Elias had left, looking up at the roof beams she'd helped raise. The cabin smelled of fresh wood and earth. Dust motes floated in the last light coming through the window opening. She'd built this. Her hands, her work, her sweat. It was the first thing in America that was truly hers. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning in the 6th week. Lianhua was working alone. Elias had gone to town for more supplies. When she heard the horses, 3 of them, coming fast from the direction of Harmony Creek, she set down the chinking tool and walked to the front of the cabin. Caleb Rourke sat on the lead horse, flanked by 2 men she recognized from the general store. All 3 looked angry. "Well, well," Caleb said, dismounting. "Look at this. The Chinaman's got herself a house." Lianhua said nothing. Elias had taught her to keep a calm face when things got dangerous. "Wood don't panic," he'd said. "Be like wood." Caleb walked around the cabin, making a show of inspecting it. His boots were loud on the packed earth. "Built on whose land exactly?" he asked. "Public land," Lianhua said. "Anyone can claim. Anyone American can claim. You ain't American. I have right to be here. I work, I build, You got no rights," Caleb interrupted. "Hell, I'm surprised Vance hasn't figured that out yet. Then again, maybe he has. Maybe this whole thing's just him claiming the land through you since he's too lazy to build a second cabin himself." That was clever, Lianhua realized. Poisoned the only alliance she had by making it seem like Elias was using her. "This is my cabin," she said firmly. "Elias helps from kindness, not from ownership. Kindness." Caleb laughed. "Nobody does nothing from kindness. Everybody wants something." He moved closer, invading her space the way he had in the general store. "What's he want, huh? What are you giving him for all this help?" The insinuation was clear. Lianhua's face heated, but she kept her voice level. "He wants nothing. I give nothing. We work together. That is all." Liar. Before she could react, Caleb grabbed one of the support poles they'd used for the roof construction, a heavy piece of timber still leaning against the cabin wall, and swung it like a club at the nearest window frame. The glass shattered. The frame splintered. "No!" Lianhua lunged forward, but one of Caleb's men caught her, holding her back. Caleb swung again, this time at the door frame. Wood cracked. The careful joints Elias had taught her to cut split apart. "Stop!" she screamed. Please, stop! But he didn't stop. He attacked the cabin with systematic efficiency, breaking the window, destroying the door frame, using the pole to pry logs out of alignment in the walls. His men joined in, kicking at the base logs, trying to destabilize the foundation. Lian Hua fought against the man holding her, but he was twice her size. All she could do was watch as weeks of work came apart. Then, hoofbeats, coming fast. Elias appeared around the bend, the mule running at a pace she'd never seen. He took in the scene instantly. The broken cabin. Lian Hua restrained, Caleb mid-swing, and his face went dark. "Let her go," he said, his voice carrying that same quiet certainty it had in the general store. The man holding Lian Hua released her immediately. Even Caleb paused mid-swing. "This is illegal construction," Caleb blustered. "On public land?" "I checked the land office myself," Elias interrupted. "This claim's been filed proper. Surveyed, registered, fees paid." Lian Hua blinked. She hadn't filed a claim, didn't have the $40 it cost. Elias met her eyes briefly. Later, his expression said, "Trust me now." "Bullshit," Caleb said. "She ain't got money to file a claim." "I filed it," Elias said. "Under her name, legal and proper." "You can't do that. She ain't even—" "The law says anyone not actively at war with the United States can file a homestead claim. Last I checked, China ain't declared war on us." Elias stepped down from the mule. "So unless you want to explain to Sheriff Morrison why you're destroying legal property, I suggest you ride back to town." Caleb's face went red. "Morrison ain't gonna side with a Chinaman over white men." "Maybe not, but he'll side with the law, and the law says this cabin's legal." Elias picked up the pole Caleb had dropped. "Now get off this property before I stop being polite." For a long moment the men stared at each other. Lian Hua held her breath. Finally, Caleb spat on the ground near Elias's boots. "This ain't over." "I figured." Caleb mounted his horse and rode off, his men following. When they were out of sight, Elias let out a long breath. "You okay?" he asked Lian Hua. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she looked at the damaged cabin and felt something break inside her chest. "They destroyed it," she whispered. "They damaged it," Elias corrected. "That's different. Damage can be fixed." "But the window, glass can be replaced. The door, we'll build a new one, stronger this time." Lian Hua's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the ground, and suddenly she was crying, big, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deeper than the destroyed cabin. They came from 3 months of holding it together, of being strong, of refusing to break. Elias didn't try to comfort her, didn't tell her it would be okay or that she should stop crying. He just sat down nearby, giving her space but staying present. When the sobs finally slowed, he said quietly, "You filed a claim." "You said you did," Lian Hua managed through tears. "I lied. Or rather, I'm about to make it true. Soon as we get to town, we're filing that claim. My money, your name, legal as it gets. I cannot let you. You can, and you will." Because Caleb was right about one thing. This ain't over. He'll be back with more men, maybe the sheriff. We need that claim filed before he can make a legal case for removing you. Why? Lian Hua looked at him, this massive man who'd chosen to defend her for reasons she still didn't understand. "Why do you care so much?" Elias was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. 8 years ago, I watched my wife and daughter die because nobody in town would help us. Sarah got sick first, fever, couldn't keep nothing down. I rode to town for the doctor, but he wouldn't come. Said I hadn't paid last year's bill, which was true. By the time I got the money, Sarah was gone. Emma got it 2 days later. He picked up a piece of broken wood, turning it over in his hands. Everyone had excuses. The doctor had his bill. Others said they didn't want to risk the fever. But the truth was simpler. We lived too far out, kept to ourselves too much. We weren't part of their community, so they didn't care if we died. He looked at Lian Hua. "I see you going through the same thing. Different reasons, same cruelty. And I figure if I couldn't save my family, maybe I can help save you. Maybe that counts for something." Lian Hua's throat was tight. "I am sorry. For your wife, your daughter." "Me too." Elias stood, brushing off his pants. "Come on, let's go file that claim before Caleb gets to the sheriff first." They rode the mule to town together, Lianhua perched behind Elias on the animal's broad back. The land office was a small building next to the courthouse, run by a clerk named Peterson, who looked surprised to see them. "Elias," he said, "what can I do for you? Need to file a homestead claim." Elias set $40 in silver on the counter. "For Miss Lianhua, 160 acres, Section 12, Range 14. Peterson looked from Elias to Lianhua and back. Is she eligible? She a criminal? Well, no, but she at war with the United States? No, but then she's eligible." Elias pushed the money forward. "Homestead Act don't say nothing about where you're born. Just says you got to be 21 and willing to improve the land. She's building a cabin, clearing ground, establishing residence. That's improvement." Peterson looked uncomfortable but started filling out the paperwork. As he wrote, he kept glancing at Lianhua like she might bite him. "I'll need her signature," he said finally. Lianhua signed the claim in careful English letters. Her hand shook slightly, but the signature was legible. Peterson stamped the document and handed her a copy. "There, legal claim registered and filed. You got 5 years to prove up. Build a dwelling, cultivate the land. After that, the land's yours outright." Lianhua stared at the paper in her hands. 160 acres. Hers. Legally. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, Elias helped her back onto the mule. As they rode toward the edge of town, Lianhua clutched the claim document like it was sacred. "I will repay you," she said. "Every dollar. I do not know how, but I will." "Don't worry about it." "But, Lian..." Elias twisted in the saddle to look at her. "Sometimes people do things because it's right, not because they expect payment. That concept seem familiar?" It didn't, actually. In her experience, everything had a price. But maybe Elias was teaching her a different kind of economics, one where respect and dignity were currencies that mattered. They rode back to the cabin in silence. When they arrived, Lianhua slid off the mule and stood looking at the damage. It was bad, but not as bad as it had seemed in the moment. The walls still stood, the roof was intact, the window could be replaced, the door rebuilt. "Tomorrow," Elias said, "we fix this, make it stronger than before." Lianhua nodded. Tomorrow, they would fix it. Tonight, she had a claim. Legal proof that she belonged. It was more than she'd had yesterday. It was a start. The repairs took 3 days. 3 days of pulling out damaged logs, cutting new notches, resetting the door frame twice because the first attempt didn't sit square. Elias worked with the focused intensity of a man who'd done this before, and Lianhua matched his pace, learning to anticipate what tool he'd need next, which angle would work best. They didn't talk much during those 3 days. The work itself was conversation enough. The rasp of the saw, the thunk of the hammer, the creak of wood settling into place. But on the third evening, as they stood back to survey the repaired cabin, Elias broke the silence. "Better than it was," he said. He was right. The new door frame was reinforced with metal brackets the blacksmith had grudgingly provided. The window, though still frameless until they could source more glass, had been boarded up tight against the coming cold. The damaged logs had been replaced with stronger ones, the joints cut deeper. "Caleb did us a favor," Lianhua said, surprising herself with the bitterness in her voice. "Made us build it stronger." "That's one way to look at it." Elias gathered his tools, wrapping them in oilcloth against the damp. "Other way is he's a bastard who'll try again soon as he thinks he can get away with it." "Let him try." The words came out harder than she intended. Something had shifted in Lianhua during those 3 days of repair. The fear that had lived in her chest since arriving in Harmony Creek had calcified into something denser. Anger, maybe, or just exhaustion with being afraid. Elias glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "That's new." "What is?" "That tone. The let him try part. You sounded almost American there." Lianhua wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an observation. "I am learning," she said simply. "Yeah." Elias shouldered his tool bag. "You are." He left as the last light faded, and Lianhua stood alone in front of the cabin. Her cabin. The claim document was tucked inside her mother's chest back at the lean-to, but she could feel its weight anyway, like it had rearranged something fundamental in her understanding of her place here. 160 acres, most of it unusable scrubland and rock, but hers nonetheless. She could stand anywhere on this property, and know, legally, officially, that she had a right to be there. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced since leaving Guangdong. The next morning brought frost thick enough to crack under her boots. Winter was coming faster than they'd hoped. The cabin still needed chinking between the logs, a proper floor to replace the dirt, a stove for heat. The list of unfinished work felt endless. Elias arrived earlier than usual, the sky still gray with pre-dawn light. He had the mule loaded differently today. Instead of tools, the animal carried lumber already milled into planks. "Where did you get this?" Lianhua asked, running her hand over the smooth wood. "Bought it." Elias started unloading. "From Morrison's mill, before you ask? Cost me, but we don't have time to mill our own if you want a floor before snow." "You should not spend more money on... We having this argument again?" Elias cut her off, not unkindly. "Because I'll tell you the same thing I told you yesterday and the day before. This is my choice. You want to pay me back someday, fine, but right now, we're building a floor." They worked through the morning, laying planks across joists they'd set the previous week. The wood fit together with satisfying precision, each board tongue and groove with its neighbor. Elias showed her how to tap them into place with a block and hammer, how to angle the nails so they'd hold without splitting the wood. "My father was carpenter," Lianhua said at one point, surprising herself. She rarely talked about her family. "In Guangdong, he built furniture, chairs, tables, beautiful work." "That where you learned to see craftsmanship?" "Maybe. He died when I was 12. After that, Mother and I went to factory." She hammered another nail, the rhythm soothing. "I forgot he taught me to respect wood, to see how things fit together." "Well, you remembered fast enough." Elias sat back on his heels, wiping sweat despite the cold. "You got a good eye for this work, natural feel for it." The compliment settled warm in her chest. Lianhua had spent so long being told she was wrong. Wrong place, wrong face, wrong language, that hearing she was good at something felt almost painful. By midday, half the floor was done. They broke for lunch, eating bread and cheese Elias had brought from town. As they ate, Lianhua noticed something different in the way he moved. A stiffness in his left shoulder, a slight favoring of his right leg. "You are hurt," she said. "Just old." Elias rotated his shoulder with a grimace. 52 ain't young, especially when you've lived hard. 52 is not old. Tell that to my knees." He stood with visible effort. "Come on, floor won't finish itself." They worked through the afternoon, and Lianhua found herself adjusting her pace to match his, taking on the heavier lifting, the more awkward angles. Elias noticed but said nothing, which she appreciated. There was dignity in letting someone help without making them feel weak for needing it. As the sun started to set, they laid the final board. The floor was complete, solid wood underfoot instead of dirt, level and smooth. Lianhua walked across it, her boots loud on the planks, and felt something close to joy. "Tomorrow we chink the walls," Elias said. "Mix up mud and moss, pack it between the logs. Keeps the wind out." "And after that?" "After that you need a stove." He scratched his beard, thinking. "I got an old one in my cabin I don't use. Might need some repair, but it'll work. We can haul it down here next week. You have already given too much. I got a stove I ain't using while you're burning through firewood twice as fast trying to heat this place with an open fire. That ain't generosity, that's practicality." He gathered his tools. "Besides, you'll need the extra wood for other things. Winter here ain't a joke." Lianhua knew that. She'd already been rationing her firewood, watching her supply dwindle faster than she could replace it. The lean-to had been small enough to heat with a modest fire. The cabin would swallow wood like a hungry animal. "I will cut more trees," she said. "We will cut more trees," Elias corrected. "Together. That's the deal, remember? Partnership. Partnership." The word still felt foreign in her mouth, but she was learning its weight. Learning what it meant to have someone who showed up day after day, expecting nothing but the work itself. After Elias left, Lianhua moved some of her belongings from the lean-to the cabin. Not everything. She was still sleeping in the temporary shelter until the cabin had heat, but enough to mark the space as hers. The embroidered panels she'd brought from China went up first, hung from nails driven into the log walls. They looked small in the larger space, but they carried home with them mountains and rivers she'd never see again, flowers that didn't grow in Dakota soil. That night, she lay in the lean-to and listened to the wind. It sounded different now, knowing she had somewhere stronger to go. Somewhere built with her own hands, her own labor. Somewhere that couldn't be taken away by men like Caleb Rourke, no matter how hard they tried. The chinking took 5 days. Elias taught her to mix clay from the creek with dried moss and grass, adding just enough water to make it pliable, but not runny. They packed it between the logs with their bare hands, working from bottom to top, sealing every gap. Get it smooth on the inside, Elias instructed. Don't worry so much about the outside. Inside's what matters for keeping warmth in. Lianhua's hands were raw by the second day, cracked and bleeding from the constant wet clay. Elias noticed and brought her a tin of salve that smelled like pine and something medicinal. Sarah made this, he said quietly, for my hands after long days working hides. Still got half a tin left. Lianhua took it carefully, understanding the gift for what it was. Not just salve, but trust. A piece of his past he was choosing to share. Thank you, she said. He just nodded and went back to chinking. On the 4th day of chinking, they had a visitor. Evelyn Harrow rode up on a gray mare, sitting side saddle with the poise of someone who'd grown up with horses. She was in her late 40s, dressed in dark wool, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Lianhua had seen her before in town. She ran the boarding house and seemed to command respect, even from men like Caleb. Elias, Evelyn called out, dismounting with practiced ease. Heard you were building out here. News travels, Elias said, not stopping his work. Always does. Evelyn walked around the cabin, examining it with a critical eye. She stopped in front of Lianhua, who straightened under the scrutiny. You're the Chinese girl. Lian, is it? Lianhua, she corrected, meeting the older woman's gaze. Yes, I heard what Caleb did. Breaking your work? Evelyn's expression was hard to read. I heard Elias filed a homestead claim in your name. Yes. Lianhua braced for judgment, for the lecture about knowing her place. Instead, Evelyn nodded. Good. About time someone pushed back on that fool. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. I brought you something, my husband's tools. He died 3 years back, and they've just been gathering dust. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a set of wood chisels, their edges still sharp, handles worn smooth from use. I cannot, Lianhua started. You can, and you will, Evelyn said firmly. A woman trying to build something real deserves proper tools. Besides, James would have liked knowing they were being used. She pressed the chisels into Lianhua's clay-stained hands. Just make something worthwhile with them. Before Lianhua could respond, Evelyn mounted her horse and rode off, leaving behind only the settling dust and the weight of unexpected kindness. Elias walked over, looking at the chisels. Evelyn's good people. Doesn't show it often, but when she does, it counts. Why? Lianhua asked. Why does she care? Because she came here 30 years ago with nothing but a husband and determination. Built that boarding house herself, mostly. She knows what it's like to be a woman in a place that don't think women can build anything except families. He went back to the wall. She sees herself in you, I reckon. That night, Lianhua used one of James Harrow's chisels to carve her initials into the door frame of the cabin. LH small letters, hidden on the interior side where they wouldn't be obvious. But there, permanent. This was hers. She'd earned it. The stove arrived the following week, hauled down from Elias's cabin on a sledge pulled by the mule and a borrowed horse. It was a cast-iron beast, heavy as sin, with a cracked door that Elias swore he could fix. Put it here, he directed, pointing to a spot along the north wall where he'd already prepared a stone pad for the base. Chimney'll go straight up through the roof. Already got the hole cut. Installing the stove was brutal work. Even with both of them lifting, the weight was almost unmanageable. They had to use a system of ropes and levers just to get it through the door, then more levers to position it on the stone pad. Careful, Elias grunted as they lowered it the final few inches. Drop it now, and we're building a new floor around a crater. They didn't drop it, barely. The stove settled into place with a groan of metal on stone. There, Elias said, breathing hard. Now for the chimney. The stovepipe sections fit together like puzzle pieces, each one locking into the next with a satisfying click. Elias climbed onto the roof to secure the top section, while Lianhua held the base steady from inside. "How's it look?" she called up. "Crooked," Elias called back. "Turn it clockwise a quarter turn." She turned it. "Better?" "Other way. My clockwise, not yours." It took 15 minutes of adjustment, but finally the pipe stood straight, sealed against weather, venting properly through the roof hole. "There," Elias said, climbing back down. "Now, let's see if it works." They built a small test fire inside the stove. For a terrifying moment, smoke started to back up into the cabin, and Lianhua thought they'd done something wrong. Then the chimney caught the draft, and the smoke reversed course, flowing up and out into the cold November air. "Perfect," Elias said. They stood there watching the fire through the stove's cracked door, feeling the heat start to radiate into the cabin. Within 20 minutes, the interior temperature had noticeably warmed. Within an hour, Lianhua had to remove her coat. "This is," she started, then couldn't find words. After months of struggling to stay warm, of burning through wood just to keep from freezing, having efficient heat felt almost decadent. "That's a proper stove," Elias said. "Burns less wood, heats better. You'll still go through a fair amount come deep winter, but nothing like you would have with an open fire." That evening, for the first time, Lianhua slept in the cabin. She moved her bedding from the lean-to, spreading blankets on the wooden floor near the stove. The space was still mostly empty, no furniture beyond what she could build or scavenge, but it was warm, solid. Hers. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind test the walls and fail to find entry. The chinking held. The roof held. Everything held. For the first time since arriving in America, Lianhua felt safe. The next morning, she woke to find snow falling. Not a blizzard, just a steady curtain of white that turned the world quiet and strange. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching it accumulate on the ground, on the trees, on the roof of her shelter. Elias arrived around mid-morning, covered in snow, leading the mule through the growing drifts. "Storm's gonna get worse," he said without preamble. "I'm heading back to my cabin before the trails get impassable. You got enough firewood?" Lianhua looked at her woodpile. Maybe 3 days' worth, if she was careful. "Yes." "Liar." Elias tied the mule to a tree and started unloading. "I brought you more. Should last a week. Maybe longer, if the storm breaks quick." "You cannot keep yet." "Yeah, I can. And I am." He stacked the wood against the side of the cabin, movements efficient despite the cold. "You got food?" "Enough." "How much is enough?" Lianhua hesitated. 4 days? Maybe 5. "Not enough." He pulled a sack from the mule and brought it inside. "Dried venison, beans, cornmeal, salt. Eat it slow. It'll last 2 weeks." Elias. "Storm like this, you could be snowed in for days. Can't have you starving." He looked around the cabin, checking the chinking, the stove, the roof. "You'll be all right here. Place is solid. But stay inside if the wind picks up. Snow can turn mean fast, and I won't be able to get back to you if something goes wrong." "I understand." "Good." He started toward the door, then paused. "You did good work here, Lian. Real good work. Don't let anyone tell you different." Then he was gone, disappearing into the snow with the mule, leaving Lianhua alone in her cabin with a week's worth of wood and 2 weeks' worth of food. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that screamed around the cabin, testing every corner, every seal. 3 days of snow that piled up to the windows, turning the world into a white void. 3 days of Lianhua alone with her thoughts and the crackling stove, and the realization that she was going to survive this. On the first day, she organized the cabin, hung her mother's embroidered panels more carefully, arranged her few possessions with deliberate care, built a simple shelf from scrap lumber to hold her cooking pot and tin cup. On the second day, she mended clothes by the stove's light, her needle steady despite the howling wind. She thought about her mother, who taught her to sew before she could read, wondered if her mother would recognize the woman she'd become. Harder, maybe. Lonelier. But still standing. On the third day, the wind died. The silence was so sudden and complete that Lianhua thought something was wrong. She opened the door to find the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick over everything, smoothing the harsh landscape into gentle curves. She dug a path from the door to the woodpile, then to the creek. The exercise felt good after 3 days of confinement. Her breath fogged in the cold air, and her muscles burned with effort, but she was warm inside her coat, warm enough to work. As she cleared snow, she saw smoke rising from the direction of town. Harmony Creek had survived the storm too. And there, to the northwest, another line of smoke. Elias's cabin. Everyone had survived. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Elias came down from his cabin every few days, ostensibly to check on the cabin's construction, but really, Lianhua suspected, to make sure she was all right. They'd work on small projects, building a simple bed frame, constructing a table from milled planks, fitting a proper door into the reinforced frame. The work was slower now, more detailed. They were past survival construction and into making the cabin livable. Each addition made the space more hers. The bed frame meant she didn't have to sleep on the floor. The table meant she could eat sitting down, work on her embroidery without hunching over. "You're making a home," Elias observed one afternoon as they sanded the table smooth. "That is the point, yes? Some people build shelters. You're building a home. There's a difference." Lianhua ran her hand over the wood, feeling the grain. "In Guangdong, we had a saying, 'A house is wood and stone. A home is where your rice bowl sits.' I think I am finally putting down my rice bowl." Elias smiled, a rare expression that softened his weathered face. "That's good. That's real good." But not everyone in Harmony Creek was pleased with her progress. The gifts from townspeople, irregular but meaningful, had slowed as winter set in. Whether from the weather or from renewed pressure from Caleb and his friends, Lianhua couldn't tell. But she felt the shift, the tentative acceptance cooling back into suspicion. She discovered how much when she went to town for supplies in mid-December. The trip into Harmony Creek was necessary despite the risk. She needed kerosene for her lamp, nails for the remaining construction, salt to preserve what meat she could hunt. With $2 silver still left from Elias's payment, and the small amount she'd saved from selling a repaired embroidery panel to Evelyn Harrow, she had just enough for essentials. McCready's store was busier than usual, crowded with people stocking up before the next storm. Lianhua waited near the back, keeping quiet, hoping to avoid notice. It didn't work. "Well, look who it is," Caleb's voice cut through the store chatter. "The Chinaman in her fancy cabin. How's that working out for you?" Lianhua didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on McCready, who was serving a customer with deliberate slowness. "Heard you're living pretty good out there," Caleb continued, moving closer. "Got yourself a proper stove, wood floor, real nice setup. All built on land that should have gone to real settlers." "Land office say different," Lianhua said quietly, immediately regretting engaging. "Land office says whatever Elias Vance tells it to say. Man's got influence from years of trade, but influence don't make right." Caleb was right behind her now. She could smell tobacco and whiskey on his breath. "You're taking resources that belong to Americans, taking wood, water, space. I take nothing that is not mine. Everything here is ours. You're just borrowing it till we decide we want it back." The store had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen. McCready still hadn't looked up from his counter. Lianhua turned slowly to face Caleb. He was drunk. Not stumbling drunk, but drunk enough to be mean, to want confrontation. "I have homestead claim," she said clearly, "legal and proper. You want to challenge it? Go to land office. Go to sheriff. But you do not challenge me in store like I am nothing." "You are nothing," Caleb shot back. "A piece of paper don't change that. Then why you care so much?" The words came out before she could stop them. "If I am nothing, why you spend so much time trying to break what I build? Why you so afraid of nothing?" Caleb's face flushed red. "I ain't afraid of—" "You are." Lianhua felt something unlock inside her chest. Months of holding back, of staying quiet, of accepting abuse. It shattered. "You afraid that if I can build cabin, claim land, survive winter, then maybe I am not so different from you. Maybe I am just as American as you, work just as hard as you. And that scare you, because if I belong here, then you cannot use my face as reason to hate me. You have to find real reason, and you do not have one." The store was dead silent. Even McCready had stopped pretending to work. Caleb stared at her, and for a moment Lianhua thought he might hit her. His fists clenched, unclenched. His jaw worked. Then a voice from the doorway. "Problem here?" Sheriff Morrison stood in the entrance, snow on his shoulders, hand resting casually on his belt near his gun. He was an older man, gray-haired and weather-worn, with eyes that missed nothing. "No problem, Sheriff," Caleb said too quickly. "Just having a conversation?" Didn't sound like conversation, sounded like harassment. Morrison's gaze shifted to Lianhua. "You all right, miss?" "Yes, Sheriff." "Thank you." Morrison looked at Caleb. "I heard about what happened at her cabin, the damage. That was you?" "Can't prove that." "Don't need to prove it to warn you. Woman's got a legal claim. Property destruction is a crime. You touch her cabin again, you'll answer to me. Clear?" Caleb's face went darker. "Since when you defending Chinamen?" "Since I swore to uphold the law, which includes property rights. Don't much care what the property owner looks like." Morrison gestured to the door. "Now get out. Come back when you're sober." Caleb left, but the look he shot Lianhua on his way out promised this wasn't finished. After he was gone, Morrison approached the counter. "McCready, you gonna serve Miss Lian, or you gonna make her wait all day?" McCready jumped. "Right, yes. Sorry, what did you need, miss?" Lianhua made her purchases quickly, Morrison standing nearby until she was done. As she headed for the door, the sheriff touched his hat brim. "Keep your head down for a while," he said quietly. "Caleb's the type to hold grudges." "I know. Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet. I can enforce the law, but I can't change how people think. And this town," he shook his head. "Well, be careful." Lianhua walked back to her cabin through snow that was starting to fall again, her supplies heavy in her pack. The confrontation with Caleb replayed in her mind. She'd spoken back, directly challenged him in front of witnesses. It felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. That night she lay in her bed, her actual bed, with a frame she'd helped build, and thought about what she'd said, about belonging, about being American. She wasn't American, wasn't sure she ever would be, or if she even wanted to be. But she was here. She'd built something real. That had to count. Outside, the snow fell steadily, covering her cabin, her land, her future in white. Winter had truly arrived, and with it, Lianhua realized, had come a different kind of test. Not of survival. She'd proven she could survive. This was a test of whether she could do more than survive, whether she could actually live. The answer came 2 weeks later, on a morning so cold that water froze solid in her bucket overnight. Lianhua was splitting firewood behind the cabin when she heard the horses, multiple horses, moving fast. She set down the axe and walked around to the front, her breath clouding in the frigid air. 6 men on horseback. Caleb Rourke in front, Sheriff Morrison beside him. Behind them, 4 men Lianhua recognized from town, shopkeepers, farmers. The kind who stayed quiet during confrontations, but showed up when there was momentum behind cruelty. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't a visit. This was something official. Morrison dismounted first, his expression unreadable. Caleb stayed on his horse, arms crossed, wearing the smile of a man who'd won something. "Miss Lian," Morrison said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "I'm afraid we got a situation here." "What situation?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Caleb here filed a formal complaint with the land office. Claims there's irregularities with your homestead claim." Morrison unfolded the paper. "Says the claim was filed improperly, that you ain't met the residency requirements, and that the land should be opened back up for legitimate settlement." "That is lie." Lianhua looked past Morrison to Caleb. "I live here, I build cabin. I meet all requirements." "Says here you only been in residence for 6 weeks," Morrison continued. "Homestead Act requires you to establish residence immediately and maintain it continuously. You were living in that lean-to for 3 months before the cabin was built. Caleb's arguing that don't count as proper residence on the claimed land." "The lean-to was on claimed land, same property." "Was it?" Caleb spoke up, that infuriating smugness thick in his voice. "Because I measured it myself last week. That lean-to sits about 40 yards outside the boundary you filed. You weren't living on your claim at all. You were squatting on public land." Lianhua's mind raced. Was he right? She'd never actually surveyed the boundaries herself. Elias had marked them out, filed the claim. Had they made a mistake? Or was Caleb just lying, counting on her not being able to prove otherwise? "I want to see your survey," she said. "Don't need to show you nothing," Caleb shot back. "I showed the land office. That's what matters." Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Miss Leon, I hate to say it, but if the lean-to was outside the claim boundaries, that's a problem. Law's pretty clear. You gotta be living on the land you're claiming, not near it." "I am living on it now. Cabin is on claimed land, I know this." "For 6 weeks," Caleb said. "Homestead Act says you gotta prove 5 years continuous residence. But it also says if you abandon the claim at any point, if you're found to have lied on the initial filing, the claim can be invalidated." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You lied, Chinaman. Said you were living on the land when you weren't. That's fraud." "I did not lie. I did not know." Lian Hua stopped herself. Saying she didn't know the boundaries only proved his point. Elias filed the claim. He knew the boundaries. He would not make mistake. "Elias ain't here," Morrison said quietly. "And even if he was, that don't change what's on paper. Caleb's got a surveyor's report saying the lean-to was outside the claim. You got anything that says different?" She didn't. Had nothing except her word against men who'd already decided she didn't belong. "This is about hate," Lian Hua said, her voice rising. "Not about law. You want me gone because of my face, my accent. You use law as weapon." "Law's the law," Caleb said. "And right now it says you got no claim here." "That ain't quite true," Morrison interjected. "Land office is reviewing the complaint. They'll make a determination, but in the meantime—" He looked genuinely sorry now. "In the meantime, Caleb's filed for the same parcel. If your claim gets invalidated, his takes precedence as next in line." "He cannot do that. He has land already. Man can file for as much land as he wants, long as he meets the requirements. And Caleb here's got witnesses saying he's ready to build, ready to establish residence." Morrison folded the paper back up. "I'm real sorry, Miss Leon, but you might want to prepare yourself for the possibility that you'll have to vacate." Vacate. The word tasted like ash. "You mean leave? Leave my cabin? My land?" "Might not come to that," Morrison said, but his tone suggested he thought it would. "Land office will investigate. Could take a few weeks, but if they find in Caleb's favor—" He trailed off. Caleb wasn't even trying to hide his satisfaction. "Told you," he said to Lian Hua. "Told you that you don't belong here. Should have listened." Something in Lian Hua snapped. Not broke. Breaking implied weakness. This was harder, colder. The last thread of patience severing clean. "Get off my land," she said quietly. Caleb laughed. "It ain't your land, that's the whole point. Until land office says different, claim is still valid, and claim says this is my property." She took a step forward. "So get off it, now." "You threatening me?" "I'm telling you what law says. Same law you hide behind." Lian Hua met his eyes. "You trespassing? Leave." Morrison cleared his throat. "She's got a point, Caleb. Until the claim's officially invalidated, it's still her property on paper. We delivered the notice. Now we should go." "I want to inspect the cabin," Caleb said. "Make sure she ain't damaging property that might be mine soon." "That is not legal," Lian Hua said. "You have no right." "Actually," Morrison said reluctantly, "if there's a dispute about the claim, the land office can authorize inspection." They did. "Says so, right here." He showed her the paper again, pointing to a section she couldn't read fast enough to verify. Caleb dismounted. "Won't take long. Just want to make sure everything's in order." He walked toward the cabin like he owned it. The other men stayed on their horses, watching. Morrison looked away, unwilling or unable to stop what was happening. Lian Hua followed Caleb inside, her hands clenched into fists. He made a show of examining the construction, running his hand over the chinking, testing the floorboards with his boot, opening the stove door to peer inside. "Decent work," he admitted grudgingly, "for a woman and an old mountain man. But it'll need improvements if I take ownership. Bigger windows, proper shelves, maybe knock out this wall, make it more open." "You will not take ownership." "We'll see." He walked to where Lian Hua's embroidered panels hung on the wall. He touched one, the mountain landscape, his fingers leaving smudges on the silk. "This the kind of garbage you tried to sell McCready? Do not touch that." "Why? What you gonna do?" He pulled the panel off its nail. "This ain't worth nothing, just decorative nonsense. Put it back." Caleb held it up to the light from the window, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. You know what I think? I think if this becomes my cabin, I don't want Chinese decorations on my walls. Don't want any trace of you here at all. He tore the panel in half. The sound of ripping silk was small, almost delicate, but it hit Lianhua like a physical blow. That panel had belonged to her mother, had crossed an ocean, had survived everything except Caleb Rourke's casual cruelty. She moved without thinking, crossed the space between them in 2 steps, grabbed the torn panel from his hands, and shoved him backward with strength she didn't know she had. Caleb stumbled, more surprised than hurt. Then his expression darkened into something dangerous. "You just assaulted me," he said softly, "in front of witnesses." Morrison appeared in the doorway. "What happened?" "She attacked me," Caleb said, touching his chest where Lianhua had pushed him, violently, without provocation. "He destroyed my property," Lianhua said, holding up the torn silk. "My mother's work." "He had no right." "You got no property," Caleb interrupted. "Not legally. Not till the land office decides. And attacking a citizen during an authorized inspection?" He looked at Morrison. "That's assault, ain't it, Sheriff?" Morrison's face was troubled. "Miss Lian, did you push him?" "He tore my mother's—" "Did you push him? Yes or no?" "Yes, but he—" "That's assault." Morrison looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I'm going to have to ask you to come into town. Let this get sorted out proper." "Sorted out?" Lianhua's voice rose. "He comes to my home, destroys what is mine, and I am one who must answer for it?" "Law don't care who started it, just who broke it," Morrison said. "And laying hands on someone, that's breaking it. I'm sorry, but you need to come with me. And if I refuse, then I arrest you for real, and this gets a lot worse." Morrison's hand moved to his belt, not quite touching his gun, but making the threat clear. "Please don't make me do that." Lianhua looked from Morrison to Caleb, who was practically glowing with triumph. This had been the plan all along. Provoke her, make her react, use her reaction as justification for removal. She'd played right into it. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long what?" "How long must I come to town?" "Just for questioning. Probably a few hours. We'll get your statement, get Caleb's statement, then you can go." "And my cabin? While I'm gone?" Morrison hesitated. "Property's still technically yours until the claim's decided. Nobody'll touch it." "He's lying," Lianhua said, looking at Caleb. "The moment I leave, he will destroy it, just like he destroyed cabin before." "I'll be right here the whole time," Caleb said innocently, "making sure nobody damages what might be my property. I'm protecting it, not destroying it." It was checkmate. If she refused to go, she'd be arrested and removed anyway. If she went, Caleb would have free access to her cabin with no witnesses. Either way, she lost, unless someone else intervened. "I want to send message to Elias Vance," Lianhua said. "He is witness to my claim. He should be there when you question me." "Elias is up on his mountain," Morrison said. "Storm's coming in. Trails will be closed by noon. No way to reach him in time." Of course. They'd planned this too. Waited for weather that would cut off her only ally. Then I request delay. Until storm passes. Until Elias can be present. "Don't work that way," Caleb said. "Sheriff's got a complaint. He's got to investigate it. Can't wait on the weather and some mountain man's convenience." Morrison nodded reluctantly. "He's right. This needs handling now. Come on, Miss Lian. The sooner we go, the sooner you get back." She had no choice. Lianhua looked around her cabin one last time. The floor she'd laid, the walls she'd chinked, the stove she'd installed. Everything she'd built with her own hands. Then she walked outside and let Morrison help her onto one of the spare horses. As they rode away, she looked back and saw Caleb standing in her doorway, watching her go. He waved. The ride to Harmony Creek took an hour through increasingly heavy snow. Morrison didn't talk, and Lianhua was grateful for that. She needed to think, to plan. There had to be a way out of this. By the time they reached town, the storm was in full force. Morrison led her to the small building that served as both sheriff's office and jail. 2 cells in the back, a desk, and stove in the front. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the stove. "I'll get some coffee going, then we'll take your statement." "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet. But you're not free to leave either. Call it protective custody till we sort this out." He busied himself with the coffee, and Lianhua sat in the hard wooden chair, trying to ignore the cold dread in her stomach. Through the window, she could see snow falling heavily enough to erase the street outside. By nightfall, travel would be impossible. Caleb had planned this perfectly. Morrison returned with 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of Lianhua, then sat behind his desk with a ledger and pencil. "All right," he said. "Tell me what happened. Your version." "Caleb destroyed my property, silk panel that belonged to my mother. He tore it deliberately to provoke me. I pushed him. That is what happened." Morrison wrote slowly. "Why'd he tear it?" "Because he is cruel. Because he enjoys destroying what I build." "That ain't what he'll say. He'll say he was conducting a legal inspection and you attacked him without cause." "Without cause?" Lianhua's hands tightened on the coffee cup. "He tore my mother's work. That is cause." In the eyes of the law, property damage don't justify physical assault, especially when the property in question, Morrison hesitated, especially when ownership of the property is disputed. "The claim is not decided until it is. Cabin is mine. Panel is mine. He had no right." "Maybe, but that'll be for a judge to determine." Morrison set down his pencil. "Here's the situation as I see it. Caleb's going to push for charges: assault and battery. If that happens, you're looking at jail time, maybe 30 days, maybe more. While you're locked up, your claim sits undefended. By the time you get out, Caleb will have his claim approved, and you'll be evicted." "So I lose either way." "Not necessarily." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "If Caleb decides not to press charges, this whole thing goes away. You go back to your cabin, wait for the land office decision on its own merits." "Why would he drop charges?" "Maybe if someone talked to him, someone with influence." "I have no influence," Lianhua said bitterly. "No, but Elias Vance does. And so does Evelyn Harrow." Morrison took a sip of coffee. "Problem is, we can't reach either of them till the storm passes, so you're stuck here for now." "In cell?" "I'd rather not, but I can't let you leave, and I can't stay awake all night watching you." Morrison looked genuinely apologetic. "I'll make it as comfortable as I can. Extra blanket, hot food. But yeah, you'll have to stay in the cell." He led her to the back. The cells were small, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with a single cot, a bucket, and bars that looked newer than the rest of the building. Morrison unlocked the right-hand cell and held the door open. "I am not criminal," Lianhua said, but she walked in anyway. "I know, but the law don't always account for that." Morrison locked the door behind her. "I'll bring dinner in a few hours. Try to rest." He left, and Lianhua sat on the cot, staring at the bars. She'd been in America for 6 months. In that time, she'd survived prejudice, poverty, isolation, winter. She'd built a cabin with her own hands, proven she could thrive in a place that didn't want her. And now she was in a cell, waiting for men to decide her fate. The hours passed slowly. Morrison brought dinner as promised, stew and bread that tasted like sawdust in her mouth. Through the small window high in the cell wall, she watched the snow fall and the light fade. By nightfall, the storm was a full blizzard. Wind rattled the building, and snow piled against the walls. No one would be traveling in this. Not Elias. Not Evelyn. No one who might help. Lianhua lay on the cot and tried not to think about what Caleb was doing to her cabin. Tried not to imagine him destroying everything she'd built, erasing her presence from land he'd decided should be his. She must have slept eventually, because she woke to voices in the front office. Not Morrison's voice, a woman's, sharp and angry. "Don't care about the storm. I rode through worse to get here. Now open that cell and let me talk to her." Evelyn Harrow. Lianhua sat up as Morrison appeared at the cell door, looking harassed. Behind him was Evelyn, snow-covered and furious. 15 minutes, Morrison said, unlocking the door. "That's all I can give you." "That's all I need." Evelyn waited until Morrison was gone, then stepped into the cell. "Are you hurt?" "No, just trapped." "I heard what happened. Caleb's version, anyway, which I don't believe for a second." Evelyn sat on the cot beside Lianhua. "Tell me the truth," Lianhua told her. "Everything. The complaint, the inspection, the torn panel, the push." Evelyn listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each detail. "That son of a bitch," she said when Lianhua finished. "He planned this whole thing." "I know, but knowing does not help. I am still here. He is still at my cabin." "About that, Evelyn pulled a folded paper from inside her coat. I went by your claim on my way here, wanted to see what Caleb was up to. Lianhua's heart sank. What did he do? Nothing, yet. He's got 2 men posted there, guarding it, he says. But I think he's waiting. For what? For the land office decision. If he destroys your cabin before they rule, it looks bad. Shows he's trying to influence the outcome. But if he waits till after, till the claim's officially his, then it's just him modifying his own property. Evelyn unfolded the paper. So I did some research. Went to the land office myself, pulled the survey records. She spread the paper on the cot. It was a hand-drawn map showing property boundaries, landmarks, distances. This is Caleb's survey, the one he submitted with his complaint. You see this? She pointed to a mark on the map. This is where he says your lean-to was, outside the claim boundaries by 40 yards. Is he right? No, he's lying. Evelyn pulled out a second paper, older, more official-looking. This is the original survey from when Elias filed your claim. I got it from Peterson at the land office. He wasn't supposed to give it to me, but I've known him since he was in short pants and he owes me favors. She laid the 2 maps side by side. See the difference? Caleb moved the boundary markers. Not much, just enough to exclude the lean-to, but he did it. The original survey shows the lean-to was inside the claim the whole time. Hope flared in Lianhua's chest. This proves he lied? This proves the surveys don't match. But there's a problem. Evelyn's expression darkened. The original survey isn't signed. Peterson says Elias never got it properly notarized, just filed it quick and paid the fees. Technically, it's not a legal document. Caleb's survey is signed, notarized, official. So even though truth is on my side, law is on his. Maybe, maybe not. Evelyn refolded the papers. I'm taking these to the county seat tomorrow if the storm clears. Going to get them in front of a territorial judge, see if we can force a proper hearing, but that takes time. Days, maybe a week. I do not have week. Caleb will push for charges tonight. I know, Evelyn stood. That's why I need you to hold on. Don't give him anything else to use against you. Be patient, be calm, be smarter than him. I am tired of being patient. I know, but patience is what wins this fight. Evelyn gripped Lianhua's shoulder. You've survived this long by being stronger than the people who want you gone. Don't stop now. After Evelyn left, Lianhua lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, her cabin stood empty. Her land sat unclaimed in any meaningful sense. Everything she'd built hung in the balance while men and paperwork decided her worth. But Evelyn believed her, was fighting for her. That had to count for something. The next morning, the storm had passed. Lianhua woke to cold sunlight streaming through the high window and the sound of shoveling outside. Morrison appeared with breakfast, eggs and coffee. Storm's over, he said. Trails are clearing. I sent word to Elias Vance's cabin. He should be here by afternoon. And Caleb? Came by last night. Wanted to file formal charges, but I told him to wait till today. Let cooler heads prevail. Morrison unlocked the cell. Come on out. You can sit by the stove while we wait. She spent the morning in the front office, watching through the window as Harmony Creek dug itself out from the snow. People passed by, glancing at the sheriff's office with curiosity or judgment. Word had spread clearly about the Chinese woman in custody. Around noon, the door opened and Elias walked in. He was covered in snow from the hard ride, his beard crusted with ice, but his eyes were sharp and angry. What the hell happened? He demanded. Morrison explained. Elias listened, his expression growing darker. Where's the original survey? He asked when Morrison finished. Evelyn took it, said she's taking it to the county seat. She ain't gonna win with that. I didn't get it notarized. Didn't think I needed to. Elias paced the small office. This is on me. I filed that claim sloppy, and now Leon's paying for it. It's not your fault, Lianhua said. You tried to help. Caleb is one who lies. Don't matter who lied if the law sides with him. Elias turned to Morrison. What's it going to take to make this go away? Caleb drops the assault charges and Leon goes free. But I don't see him doing that without getting something in return. Like what? Like her leaving, abandoning the claim. Morrison looked uncomfortable. That's what he really wants. If she walks away, he gets the land without a fight. I will not abandon it, Lianhua said. Didn't think you would. Elias resumed pacing. All right. Where's Caleb now? At the boarding house, last I heard. Elias headed for the door. I'm going to talk to him. Elias, that ain't... Morrison started. I ain't asking permission. I'm telling you what's happening. Elias looked back at Lian Hua. You sit tight. I'll handle this. He left before Morrison could object. An hour later, the door opened again. This time it was Caleb, and he wasn't alone. He had 6 men with him, farmers and shopkeepers, the same ones who'd ridden out to her cabin. They crowded into the small office, filling it with the smell of tobacco and hostility. Where's Vance? Caleb demanded. Went looking for you, Morrison said. Well, I'm here, and I want her charged, now. Caleb pointed at Lian Hua. Assault and battery. I got witnesses. I got marks where she pushed me, and I want her held till trial. Caleb, maybe we should... No more maybe. No more waiting. Caleb's voice rose. This is my town. These are my people. And I'm done watching some Chinese immigrant get special treatment because Elias Vance has a soft spot for strays. That ain't what's happening here, Morrison said. Then prove it. Charge her. Lock her up. Show this town that the law applies to everyone, not just folks Elias decides to protect. The men behind Caleb muttered agreement. Morrison looked at Lian Hua, and she saw the resignation in his eyes. He was going to cave. The pressure was too much, the political cost too high. Then the door opened one more time. Elias walked in, and behind him was Evelyn Harrow. Behind her were 5 more people. Sam Miller from the livery, Martha Hendricks, the preacher's wife, the blacksmith, the widow Thompson, young Peterson from the land office. Hold on, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Before you do something stupid, Morrison, you might want to hear what we found. She pulled out the survey maps and spread them on Morrison's desk. These are 2 different surveys of the same land. One shows the lean-to inside the claim boundaries. One shows it outside. They can't both be right. The signed one's right, Caleb said. The one I had done proper, by a real surveyor. Thomas Beckett? Evelyn pulled out another paper. That's who signed your survey, right? Yeah, so Thomas Beckett left for California 2 months ago. I got a letter here from his brother confirming it. Evelyn held up the letter. Which means he couldn't have surveyed your claim last week like your paperwork says, which means somebody forged his signature. The office went dead quiet. Caleb's face flushed. That's a lie. I paid Beckett before he left. Then you got a receipt? Proof of payment? Evelyn stepped closer. Because that's fraud, Caleb. Submitting false documents to a federal land office. That's a crime. Federal crime. You can't prove... I can prove the signature's forged. I can prove Beckett was already gone when this survey was supposedly done. And I can prove you've been trying to steal land from a legal claimant using falsified documents. Evelyn's voice was steel. Now, you want to push this? You want to involve federal investigators? Because I'm happy to make that happen. Caleb stared at her, trapped. The men behind him shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less certain. She still assaulted me, Caleb said weakly. After you destroyed her property, Evelyn shot back. Property you had no legal right to touch, on a claim that's starting to look pretty damn solid compared to your fraudulent paperwork. Morrison cleared his throat. Caleb, I think maybe you should drop this, before it gets worse. Drop it. Drop it. Evelyn's voice was quiet but final. Walk away, now, or I swear I'll make sure every newspaper between here and Washington knows exactly what you tried to do. For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he spat on Morrison's floor and turned toward the door. This ain't over, he said. Yeah, Elias rumbled from where he stood blocking the exit. It is. And if you go near her cabin again, if you so much as look at her wrong, you answer to me. We clear? Caleb pushed past him without responding. His supporters followed, emptying the office as quickly as they'd filled it. When they were gone, Morrison let out a long breath. Well, that was something. Miss Lian's free to go? Evelyn asked. Morrison nodded. No charges, no complaint? Far as I'm concerned, this is done. Lian Hua stood on shaking legs. Thank you, all of you. Don't thank us yet, Evelyn said. Your claim's still technically under review. We bought you time, but the land office has to make a final ruling. How long? Could be weeks, could be months. Federal bureaucracy moves slow. Evelyn gathered her papers. But Peterson here is going to make sure the right documents get in front of the right people. Ain't you, Peterson? The young clerk nodded nervously. Yes, ma'am. I'll handle it personal. Sam Miller stepped forward, hat in his weathered hands. Miss Leon, I know we ain't been welcoming. That's on us. But what Caleb tried to do, that ain't right. My boy and I will ride out to your cabin regular. Make sure nobody bothers it while this gets sorted. I'll send food, Martha added, enough to get you through till spring. One by one, the others offered help. Firewood. Tools. Their presence at the cabin to discourage further harassment. Not grand gestures, just quiet commitments from people who'd finally decided which side of the line they stood on. Lianhua didn't know what to say. Thank you felt inadequate, so she just bowed, the way her mother had taught her, showing respect and gratitude in the old way. They left eventually until only Elias, Evelyn, and Morrison remained. Come on, Elias said to Lianhua. Let's get you home. They rode out together through snow that sparkled in the afternoon sun. The world looked clean, scrubbed new by the storm. As they approached her cabin, Lianhua braced herself for damage. But the cabin stood whole. Caleb's guards were gone. The door was still secure, the windows intact. She dismounted and walked inside. Everything was as she'd left it. The torn silk panel lay on the table where she'd dropped it, but nothing else had been touched. They didn't destroy it, she said, not quite believing it. Because they knew they'd lost, Elias said from the doorway. Evelyn made sure of that. Lianhua picked up the torn panel. She could repair it, maybe. Stitch it back together with careful hands and patience. It would show the damage, would never be quite what it was, but it would survive, like her. What happens now? She asked. Now you wait. Keep living here, keep improving the land. When the land office rules in your favor, and they will, you finish your 5 years and this place is yours forever. Elias stepped inside. And in the meantime, you got people watching your back. That's new. It was new. For the first time since arriving in Harmony Creek, Lianhua wasn't alone. Wasn't the stranger everyone could safely ignore or abuse. She was someone the town had to reckon with, someone worth defending. She looked around her cabin, the walls she'd built, the floor she'd laid, the stove that kept her warm. This was hers. Not because a piece of paper said so, though that helped, but because she'd bled for it, fought for it, refused to let men like Caleb Rourke erase her. Thank you, she said to Elias, for everything. Don't thank me. You did this. Built it, defended it, survived it. He moved toward the door. I'll check on you in a few days. Make sure you got everything you need. After he left, Lianhua sat at her table and carefully laid out the torn silk panel. She threaded a needle with red silk, the color of phoenix fire, of survival, of stubborn refusal to die, and began to stitch. Outside, the sun set over her land, her 160 acres, her future. And for the first time in 6 months, that future felt possible. The stitching took 3 days. 3 days of sitting by lamplight with the torn silk panel spread across her table, pulling the severed edges back together with red thread that showed like scars against the mountain landscape. The repair was visible. Anyone looking would see where Caleb had ripped it. But the panel held. Damaged, but whole. A different kind of strength than unblemished perfection. On the 4th morning after her release, Lianhua woke to knocking. Not aggressive pounding like Caleb's visits, but hesitant, almost apologetic tapping. She opened the door to find Sam Miller's son standing there, hat in his hands, looking anywhere but at her face. Ma'am, he mumbled. Pa sent me. Said to check if you need anything. The boy couldn't have been more than 16. Lianhua recognized him from the general store. He'd been one of the ones who looked away when Caleb had thrown her work in the dirt. Ashamed then, ashamed now. I am fine, she said. But thank you. Pa also said. The boy shifted his weight. Said if you need help with anything, building, fixing, whatever, I could come by a couple times a week. Learn some things, maybe. Lianhua studied him. This wasn't just Sam trying to make amends. This was a father teaching his son a different way of seeing the world. Teaching him that the Chinese woman wasn't something to fear or mock, but someone who could teach him skills worth learning. You know how to split wood? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Come back tomorrow morning. Bring your axe. I show you how to split it properly so it dries right for burning. The boy's face lit up. Yes, ma'am. I'll be here. He left, and Lian Hua stood in her doorway watching him go. The landscape was different now after the storm, softer somehow, the harsh edges buried under snow. But underneath, the rock and scrub were still there, still difficult. Winter wasn't done with them yet. That afternoon brought Martha Hendricks with a basket of food as promised. Bread, preserves, a small wheel of cheese, dried apples. She set it on Lian Hua's table without ceremony. This ain't charity, Martha said quickly. It's just, we had extra from the harvest. No sense letting it go to waste. Thank you, Lian Hua said. This is very kind. Kindness would have been helping you months ago. Martha looked around the cabin, taking in the simple furnishings, the repaired silk panel on the wall. You did all this yourself? You and Elias? Mostly myself. Elias taught me. But I did the work. That's more than most men in this town could do, and they've been here all their lives. Martha's expression was hard to read. Look, I ain't going to pretend I understand you. Where you come from, why you came here, what you believe, all that's foreign to me. But I understand work. I understand someone trying to build something from nothing, and I'm sorry we made that harder than it needed to be. It wasn't a grand apology, wasn't tearful or dramatic, just honest acknowledgement of failure. Somehow that made it mean more. You are here now, Lian Hua said. That is what matters. After Martha left, Lian Hua put the food away carefully, organizing it on the shelf Elias had helped her build. The cabin was starting to feel less like shelter and more like home. Small touches accumulating into something bigger. A life, not just survival. The next visitor came 2 days later. The widow Thompson, carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Blankets, she said, setting the bundle on Lian Hua's bed. Made them myself. Got too many now that it's just me in the house. Lian Hua unfolded one. The stitching was precise, the fabric thick and warm. These are beautiful. You should sell them. Tried. Town's too small. Everyone's got blankets already. Mrs. Thompson sat at the table without being invited, which somehow felt more genuine than formal politeness. You know how to sew, I hear. Real fine work. My mother taught me, before factory work. Could you teach others? There's women in town might pay for lessons. Fancy stitching for special occasions? Mrs. Thompson leaned forward. I'm thinking we could organize something. Few hours a week, women who want to learn. You teach, they pay. Not much, but regular money. Lian Hua's hand stilled on the blanket. They would come here? To my cabin? Why not? You got space, got the skills. And after what happened with Caleb, people are thinking different. Not everyone, but enough. Mrs. Thompson's voice softened. I lost my husband 3 years back. Typhoid. This town, they were kind at first. Brought food, helped with chores. But after a few months, they forgot. Moved on. Left me to figure it out alone. I know what it's like to be the one people look past. You are not foreign, Lian Hua said. Is different. Different reasons, same loneliness. Mrs. Thompson stood. Think about the teaching. Could be good for you. Good for them too. After she left, Lian Hua sat with the idea. Teaching embroidery meant people coming to her cabin, meant interaction, conversation, presence. Part of her wanted that, the connection, the purpose beyond mere survival. But part of her remembered the mockery, the cruelty, remembered that acceptance could evaporate as quickly as it formed. That night, she worked by lamplight on a new embroidery piece. Not mountain landscapes this time, but something simpler. A small panel showing a cabin in winter, smoke rising from the chimney, cottonwoods bare against snow. Her cabin. Her reality. She worked slowly, letting muscle memory guide the needle while her mind wandered. The teaching could work. Could give her income independent of charity or Elias's support. Could prove she had value beyond what people assumed about her face and accent. But it also meant vulnerability. Meant opening her home to people who might still harbor Caleb's beliefs, just buried deeper. She was still thinking about it when Sam Miller's son arrived the next morning with his axe. The boy, his name was Danny, she learned, was eager but clumsy. He swung the axe with too much force, not enough precision, embedding it in the wood instead of splitting it clean. You fight the wood, Lian Hua said, taking the axe from him. See? You try to break it with anger. But wood has grain, has natural weakness. You find the weakness, work with it, and wood splits itself. She demonstrated, placing the axe edge along a visible crack in the log and tapping it with measured strikes. The wood split clean down the middle. "You try," she said, handing back the axe. Danny copied her motion. The log split, though not as cleanly, but he grinned like he'd accomplished something remarkable. "That's amazing," he said. "Pa never taught me that." "Your father knows this, but sometimes we learn better from strangers than family." They worked through the morning, splitting enough wood to replenish what Lianhua had burned through the winter. Danny talked while they worked, nervous chatter about town gossip, about his sister's upcoming wedding, about how his father was teaching him the livery business, but Danny thought maybe he wanted to try carpentry instead. "You like building things?" Lianhua asked. "I think so. Never really tried, but watching what you and Mr. Vance did here," he gestured at the cabin. "That seems more real than just shoeing horses, you know?" "Building is real, but so is shoeing horses. Both are honest work." Lianhua set down her axe. "The work you do, it matters less than doing it well, with purpose." "Is that a Chinese saying?" "Is a human saying. My father told me, back in Guangdong. He was carpenter. Built furniture that lasted generations." She paused. "He also told me that people who build things they cannot afford to hate. Hate makes bad joints, weak foundations. Building requires respect. For materials, for craft, for people you work beside." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry about McCready's store. When Caleb was being cruel, I should have said something." "You were afraid. Fear is human. Still should have said something." He picked up another log. "Won't happen again. If Caleb starts trouble, I'll speak up." "Good. But do not do it for me. Do it because it's right thing. Big difference." They finished the woodpile by noon. Danny left with promises to return the following week, and Lianhua spent the afternoon thinking about what he'd said. About speaking up. About the difference between helping someone because they were foreign and needed defending versus helping them because cruelty was wrong regardless of who suffered it. The distinction mattered. One was charity, patronizing and temporary. The other was principle, the foundation of actual community. That evening, Evelyn Harrow arrived on horseback carrying a leather satchel. "Got news," she said, dismounting. "From the territorial office." Lianhua's stomach tightened. "About the claim?" "About Caleb's fraud complaint. They investigated the forged survey, found enough evidence to charge him." Evelyn pulled papers from the satchel. "He's facing federal charges for document falsification. Won't go to trial for months probably, but in the meantime, his counterclaim's been dismissed. Your homestead's secure." The relief hit Lianhua like a physical force. "It is mine? Legally?" "Legally. You still got to prove up the full 5 years, but the land's yours as long as you maintain residence and make improvements." Evelyn handed her the official document. "Congratulations. You're a landowner." Lianhua looked at the paper. Official stamps, legal language she could barely parse, but her name clear at the top. Lianhua. 160 acres. Secure. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything. The investigation, the papers, the fighting. Don't thank me for doing what should have been done from the start." Evelyn's voice was gruff. "This town's got a lot to answer for. Way we treated you, way we let Caleb run roughshod. That's on us." "But you stopped it. You and others, that counts." "Maybe." Evelyn looked around the cabin. "Mrs. Thompson mentioned teaching embroidery. You thinking about that?" "I do not know. Seems risky." Everything's risky. Building this cabin was risky. Standing up to Caleb was risky. Teaching some bored housewives fancy stitching? Evelyn almost smiled. "That's nothing compared to what you already survived." After Evelyn left, Lianhua sat at her table with the land document spread in front of her. The paper made it real in a way the building hadn't. This wasn't temporary, wasn't contingent on anyone's approval or tolerance. This was hers by law, by right, by the work of her own hands. She thought about the teaching, about women coming to her cabin, sitting at this table, learning stitches her mother had taught her in another country, another life. It felt like bridging something, not erasing the distance between where she'd been and where she was, but building a connection across it. The next morning, she walked into town. The journey felt different now, knowing she had legal standing, knowing Caleb couldn't simply destroy what she'd built. The cold was still bitter, the landscape still harsh, but she moved through it with something that felt almost like confidence. At Mrs. Thompson's house, she knocked and waited. The widow opened the door, surprise crossing her face. "I will teach," Lianhua said without preamble. "Embroidery lessons, 2 afternoons each week. Women who want to learn, they can come." Mrs. Thompson's smile was genuine. "That's wonderful. I'll spread the word. How much you charging?" 25 cents per lesson. "Make it 50 cents. Your work's worth it, and if they're serious about learning, they'll pay." Lianhua hesitated, then nodded. 50 cents. "Good, I'll organize it. First lesson next week?" "Next week." Word spread quickly. By the time Lianhua returned to her cabin, she felt the weight of commitment. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was building something beyond basic existence, a livelihood, a place in the community. The first lesson came too fast and too slow. Lianhua spent the intervening days cleaning the cabin obsessively, arranging her embroidery materials, practicing what she'd say. She'd worked in factories, survived an ocean crossing, built a home from raw timber. But the idea of teaching women who might still see her as foreign, other, wrong, that terrified her in a different way. On the appointed day, she woke early and prepared tea, set out her needles and thread in careful arrangements. Waited. The knock came at 2 in the afternoon. Lianhua opened the door to find 5 women standing there, bundled against the cold. Mrs. Thompson she recognized, Martha Hendricks. The other 3 were younger, wives of shopkeepers maybe, or daughters of farmers. They looked nervous but curious. "Come in," Lianhua said, stepping aside. They filed in, removing their coats, looking around the cabin with barely concealed interest. Lianhua had expected judgment, but saw mostly curiosity. The repaired silk panel on the wall drew immediate attention. "Did you make that?" one of the younger women asked. "Yes, in San Francisco, before I came here. It's beautiful, even with the—" She gestured at the visible repair. "Even with damage, yes. Sometimes repair makes things more beautiful, shows survival, not just creation." She had them sit at the table and distributed needles, thread, small squares of plain cloth for practice. Started with basic stitches, running stitch, back stitch, the foundation of everything more complex. "Embroidery is not about speed," she said, demonstrating. "Is about precision, about seeing the pattern before you make it, about patience." The women worked quietly at first, focused on their stitches. But gradually, conversation started. Small talk about the weather, about upcoming spring, about children and husbands, and the mundane details of frontier life. Lianhua listened more than she spoke, learning the rhythms of their speech, the concerns that shaped their days. "Your English is very good," Martha said at one point. "How'd you learn?" "In San Francisco. Laundry where I worked, the owner made us learn. Said customers would not trust us if we could not speak properly." Lianhua demonstrated a new stitch. "I practiced every night. Read newspapers people left behind. Listen to conversations on street." "Must have been hard," Mrs. Thompson said, "learning a whole new language." "Everything here is hard, language, customs, weather, but hard does not mean impossible." One of the younger women, her name was Anne, looked up from her stitching. "Why did you come? To America, I mean. If you had work in China, had family—" It was the question Lianhua had been waiting for, the one that lurked beneath every interaction. She could deflect, could give a simple answer, but these women were in her cabin, learning from her, paying her. They deserved honesty. "My mother wanted better life for me. In Guangdong, I would work in factory until I married. Then I would work in factory and raise children until I died. Maybe 40 years old, maybe 50 if I was lucky. My mother, she sold everything we had to buy my passage to America. She died 2 months later." The room had gone quiet. Anne's needle was still. "She died believing I would have better life, that I would be free to build something she could never build. So I came here to her gold mountain and I found—" Lianhua gestured around the cabin. "This, not gold, just land and hard work. But it is mine. I built it. That would make her proud, I think." Martha cleared her throat. "I think you're right. It would." They worked in silence for a while after that. Not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. The kind of quiet that came from people actually considering what they'd heard, rather than just waiting to speak again. By the time the lesson ended, all 5 women had completed basic samplers. Rough work, uneven stitches, but recognizable. Progress. Same time next week? Mrs. Thompson asked as they prepared to leave. Yes. Next week we learn French knots and chain stitch. They paid their 50 cents and left, chattering among themselves as they walked back toward town. Lian Hua closed the door and looked at the $2.50 on her table. Money she'd earned not through charity or Elias's support, but through her own skill, her own teaching. It was a small amount, but it was hers. The lessons continued weekly. The group grew, 6 women, then 7, then 8. Some came once and never returned. Others became regulars, showing up reliably every week with their practice pieces and their questions. Lian Hua found herself looking forward to the lessons, to the routine of teaching, to the gradual improvement she saw in her students' work. More than that, she started to learn about Harmony Creek in ways she hadn't before. The women talked while they stitched, and Lian Hua listened. She learned that Martha's husband drank too much and sometimes got mean, that Anne was pregnant with her 3rd child and terrified she'd lose this one like she'd lost the 2nd, that Mrs. Thompson's son had moved to Denver and rarely wrote. Their lives weren't easier than hers, just different struggles, different fears. But all of them were trying to build something in a place that made building hard. All of them were surviving. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lian Hua stopped being the Chinese woman they tolerated and became simply Lian, the one who taught embroidery, the one who'd stood up to Caleb, the one who'd built that cabin by the cottonwoods. Elias noticed the change when he came by one afternoon in late February. The lessons had just ended, and women were walking back to town as he arrived. Getting popular, he observed, dismounting. It's strange, Lian Hua admitted. A month ago, they would not look at me. Now they come to my home, learn from me. People are like trees. They grow toward light when it's available. You're the light right now, proof that someone can build something real despite this town's worst efforts. Elias followed her inside. That scares some folks, but it inspires others. What about Caleb? What does it do to him? Makes him furious. But he's facing federal charges now. Can't touch you without making things worse for himself. Elias sat at the table. Still, I wouldn't let your guard down completely. Men like him, they hold grudges. I know, but I cannot live in fear of what he might do. I tried that already. Did not work. Elias nodded. You're learning. That's good. He'd brought supplies as usual. Nails, a new saw blade, kerosene for her lamp. But this time, he also brought something else. A small package wrapped in cloth. What is this? Lian Hua asked. Open it. She unwrapped the cloth to find a carving. A small wooden bird, wings spread mid-flight, every feather detailed with careful knife work. It was beautiful. I made it over the winter, Elias said, suddenly sounding self-conscious. Needed something to do with my hands during the long nights. Thought you might like it. Lian Hua turned the carving over, examining it. The wood was smooth, the weight balanced. She could see hours of work in every detail. This is gift? She asked. If you want it. Why? Elias was quiet for a moment. Because you remind me that there's still good people in the world. People worth knowing. And I wanted you to have something that wasn't about survival. Something just beautiful for its own sake. Lian Hua felt her throat tighten. She set the carving carefully on her shelf where it caught the afternoon light. Thank you, she said. I will keep it safe. After Elias left, she sat at her table with the bird carving in her hands, thinking about gifts and what they meant. Elias had given her so much already: flour, tools, knowledge, support. But this was different. This was personal, not practical, not necessary, just kind. It had been so long since someone had been kind to her without wanting something in return that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Outside, the February wind rattled the cabin walls, but inside it was warm. The stove burned steady, the chinking held, and on the shelf sat a carved bird that had no purpose except to be beautiful. That night, Lian Hua slept deeply for the first time in months. No dreams of Guangdong or her mother or the factory machines. No nightmares of Caleb destroying her cabin. Just deep, dreamless sleep in a home she'd built with her own hands, on land that was legally hers, in a life she was slowly, carefully constructing from the ruins of everything she'd lost. When she woke the next morning, sun streamed through the window. Real sun, not the weak winter light she'd grown accustomed to, but the stronger warmth of approaching spring. The snow outside was starting to melt at the edges. Icicles dripped from the roof. Winter was ending. She'd survived it, more than survived. She'd built a life in the middle of it, had created something that would outlast the cold, the cruelty, the doubt. The cabin stood solid. The land claim was secure. Women came to her table to learn. Elias brought her carved birds. Lian Hua stood in her doorway, watching the sun climb higher, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself since leaving China. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the deeper hope of someone who'd found their place and knew they could keep it. The hope of someone who'd stopped merely enduring and started actually living. She had work to do still, fences to build, garden to plant come spring, more embroidery to create and sell, the 5-year requirement to prove up the land claim. None of it would be easy. But she'd done impossible things already. She could do hard things, too. The town was changing around her, or maybe she was changing within it. Either way, Harmony Creek no longer felt quite so hostile. Sam Miller tipped his hat when she passed. Sheriff Morrison nodded greeting. Even McCready at the general store had started keeping aside thread and colors he thought she might want, setting them behind the counter for her without being asked. Not friendship exactly. Not yet. But something warmer than tolerance. Recognition, maybe. Respect earned through stubborn refusal to disappear. As the sun climbed higher, Lian Hua returned to her table and picked up her embroidery. She was working on something new, not a commission, not for sale, but for herself. A panel showing a cabin in spring, cottonwoods budding green, smoke rising from the chimney into clear sky. The future she was building, one stitch at a time. Spring arrived in pieces, not all at once. First, the snow melted from the south-facing slopes, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. Then the ice broke up in the creek, water running fast and cold with snowmelt from the hills. Finally, in early March, the cottonwoods began to bud. Tiny green promises scattered along bare branches. Lian Hua planted her first garden on a morning when the air still carried winter's bite, but the ground had thawed enough to work. She'd saved seeds from the vegetables Martha had brought, and Elias had contributed potato eyes and onion sets from his own supplies. The plot was small, maybe 20 feet square, but she worked it carefully, turning the soil, pulling rocks, marking rows with string. Danny Miller came by while she was planting and stood watching for a few minutes before speaking. "My pa says you're wasting your time," he said. "Says the ground here's too rocky, too poor. Most folks give up on gardens after the first year." "Your father is probably right," Lian Hua said, pressing a seed into the dirt. "But I will try anyway. Maybe I fail. Maybe something grows. Either way, I learn. Can I help?" She handed him the string and showed him how to mark straight rows. They worked together through the morning, and Lian Hua found herself explaining techniques her mother had taught her. How to space seeds for optimal growth. How to tell good soil from bad by its smell and texture. How to read the land's natural drainage. "You know a lot about farming," Danny said. "I know about rice paddies in Guangdong. This land is different, but some things are universal. Seeds need water, light, room to grow, same everywhere." By noon, the garden was planted. It looked small and vulnerable, just disturbed earth and invisible potential. But it was a start. The embroidery lessons continued to grow. By mid-March, Lian Hua had 12 regular students, enough that she'd started dividing them into 2 groups, beginners on Tuesdays, advanced on Thursdays. The advanced group was working on a collaborative piece, a large panel that would hang in the new schoolhouse the town was building. Each woman contributed a section depicting something meaningful to Harmony Creek. The general store, the church, the creek itself. Lian Hua had suggested they include her cabin in the design. The women had agreed without hesitation, which felt significant somehow. Her cabin, her presence, woven into the town's story as if she'd always been there. During one Thursday lesson, Anne brought news. "Caleb's leaving," she said, threading her needle. "Heard it from my husband, who heard it from Morrison. The federal charges are going forward, and his lawyer says he'll probably face fines and possibly jail time. He's selling his property and heading to Montana. Says he's done with Harmony Creek." The other women murmured, their needles pausing mid-stitch. Good riddance, Mrs. Thompson said bluntly. Man's been poison to this town for years. He wasn't always that way, Martha said quietly. When he first came here, he was different, helpful even. But losing his wife in childbirth, then his ranch failing, it turned something in him sour. Grief don't excuse cruelty, Lianhua said, not looking up from her work. Many people lose what they love. Not all of them become what he became. That's true, Martha admitted. I guess I feel sorry for him, even after everything. You can feel sorry and still be glad he is leaving, Lianhua said. Both things can be true. The conversation moved on, but Lianhua thought about it later that evening. Caleb had tried to destroy her, had nearly succeeded. Part of her wanted to feel triumph at his departure, wanted the satisfaction of having outlasted her enemy. But mostly, she just felt tired. Tired of the fight, tired of proving herself, tired of the weight of other people's hatred. His leaving wouldn't solve everything. There were others in Harmony Creek who still saw her as foreign, as wrong. But it removed the loudest voice, the one who'd organized resistance into action. Maybe without him, the others would drift into grudging acceptance, or at least peaceful indifference. That was enough. She didn't need love, just the space to exist. April brought rain, hard spring storms that turned the roads to mud and filled the creek until it threatened to overflow its banks. Lianhua's garden sprouted, uneven and patchy but growing, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil like small victories. Elias came by less frequently now that the weather had turned. The trails were treacherous with mud, and he was busy with his own spring work. Trapping season was ending, and he was processing pelts to sell in the summer. But he sent Danny with supplies when Lianhua needed them, and messages checking that she was managing. She was managing, more than managing. The embroidery lessons brought in steady money, not much, but enough to buy necessities without relying on charity. She'd started taking commissions too, fine work for special occasions, a wedding handkerchief for Anne's sister, a christening gown for Martha's granddaughter, a table runner for Evelyn's boarding house. The work was meticulous, demanding, but satisfying in a way factory labor had never been. This wasn't production for faceless masses. This was creation for specific people, specific moments. Her stitches would be there at weddings, births, gatherings, part of the community's memory. On a wet afternoon in late April, Sheriff Morrison rode out to her cabin. Lianhua saw him coming and felt the old fear spike. Official visits never meant good things. But Morrison dismounted with a smile, which was new. Miss Lian, he said, touching his hat. Got something for you. He pulled an envelope from his coat, official-looking, with territorial seals and careful script. Lianhua took it with hands that wanted to shake. What is this? Open it. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Legal language filled the page, dense and formal. But one line stood out, repeated 3 times for emphasis. The claim of Lianhua to Homestead Parcel Section 12, Range 14, is hereby approved and validated. It is official? She asked, not quite believing. Official as it gets. You've proven residence, made improvements, met all requirements. You're a legal landowner now. Once you complete the full 5 years, the deed transfers to you outright. But for now, this claim is yours. Nobody can take it away. Lianhua read the letter again, making sure she hadn't misunderstood. But the words were clear, approved, validated, hers. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me. You earned this, every inch of it. Morrison mounted his horse. Congratulations, Miss Lian. You're an American landowner now. He rode off, and Lianhua stood in the rain holding the letter, letting water spot the official paper. She didn't care. The words were permanent, sealed, legal. This was hers. She'd done it. Against all odds, against a town's hostility, against winter and poverty and men who'd wanted her gone, she'd claimed her piece of America and made it stick. That evening, she walked to town despite the rain and mud, found Elias at the livery, helping Sam Miller with a difficult horse. He looked up when she entered, saw her expression, and smiled before she said anything. You got the letter, he said. How did you know? Morrison stopped by here first, wanted to make sure I heard. Elias finished with the horse and walked over. I'm proud of you, Lian. What you built, how you fought for it. That's something real. I could not have done it without you. Yeah, you could have. Would have been harder, taken longer, but you would have found a way. That's who you are. They stood there in the dim livery, rain hammering on the roof, and Lian Hua felt something shift. The gratitude she felt for Elias had been there from the start, but underneath it now was something else. Recognition, maybe. Not of debt owed or charity received, but of partnership. Of two people who'd chosen to help each other and both came out stronger. I want to build fence, she said, around garden and extending to the tree line, to mark what is mine. Good idea. I'll help. You do not have to. I know, but I want to. Elias's expression was serious. You got land now. Real, legal land. That means something. Means you're here to stay, and I'd like to be part of that. If you'll have me. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Lian Hua was still parsing. Was he asking for partnership? Friendship? Something more? What do you mean? She asked carefully. Elias looked uncomfortable, a rare expression on his weathered face. I mean, I've been alone on that mountain for 8 years. Been fine with it mostly, but this winter, working with you, teaching you, watching you build something real, it reminded me there's value in connection, in having someone to build alongside. You want to leave your cabin? No, that's still mine. But maybe I could be here more, help with the fence, the garden, future projects. Not as charity or obligation, as, he searched for words, as something we both choose, a partnership that benefits both of us. Lian Hua thought about it, about what it would mean to have Elias as a permanent presence rather than an occasional visitor, about whether she was ready for that kind of connection after so long alone. I need to think, she said finally. Fair enough. Take your time. Elias went back to the horse. Offer stands whenever you're ready. Lian Hua walked home through the rain, her mind churning. The safe choice was to maintain distance, to keep her life small and self-contained where no one could hurt her. But safety hadn't built her cabin. Safety hadn't stood up to Caleb. Safety was just another word for staying small. She'd come to America to build something her mother never could. That meant taking risks, meant choosing connection over isolation, even when connection was terrifying. By the time she reached her cabin, she'd made her decision. The next morning, she went back to town and found Elias at the boarding house eating breakfast. She sat down across from him without being invited. Yes, she said. Elias looked up from his eggs. Yes to what? To partnership, to building the fence together, to you being here more. She met his eyes. But as equals. Not you helping poor foreign woman, both of us building something together. A slow smile crossed Elias's face. Equals. I can do that. They started the fence the following week. It was hard work, digging post holes in rocky soil, cutting rails, stretching wire, but they developed a rhythm, working side by side in comfortable silence broken by occasional conversation about technique or an angle or whether a particular post was set deep enough. Danny joined them some afternoons, learning fence building the way he'd learned wood splitting. Other townspeople stopped by to watch or offer advice or occasionally to help. Sam Miller brought extra wire he had lying around. The blacksmith donated metal brackets. Mrs. Thompson showed up one afternoon with lunch for all of them and stayed to help dig holes. The fence took shape slowly, a physical boundary marking where Lian Hua's land began and the rest of the world ended. It wasn't tall or imposing, just functional. But it was hers. In late May, as they were setting the final posts, Elias pulled something from his pocket, a small object wrapped in cloth, similar to how he'd presented the carved bird. What is this? Lian Hua asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. Another gift, if you'll take it. She unwrapped the cloth to find a stone pendant on a leather cord. The stone was smooth and gray, river-worn into an oval shape. Simple, unadorned. I found it in the creek near my cabin, Elias said. Been carrying it for a few years. It's just a rock, but it's lasted through floods and ice and everything the mountains could throw at it. Reminded me of you. Still here despite everything. Lian Hua turned the stone over in her palm. It was cool and solid, heavy for its size. She could feel the years in it, the persistence. You are giving me rock, she said, but she was smiling. I'm giving you a symbol of endurance, of lasting. Elias looked almost embarrassed. Of someone I respect more than just about anyone I've met. Lianhua slipped the cord over her head, letting the stone settle against her chest. It felt right there, grounding. "Thank you," she said. "I will wear it always." They finished the fence that afternoon. As the sun set, Lianhua stood inside her newly bounded property, cabin, garden, fence line extending to the cottonwoods, and felt the weight of accomplishment. This was hers, all of it. Built with her hands, defended with her voice, claimed with her presence. Elias stood beside her, and Lianhua realized that somewhere along the way, her understanding of partnership had shifted. It wasn't about needing someone to survive. It was about choosing to build something larger than what either person could create alone. "Stay for dinner," she said. Elias nodded. "I'd like that." They ate at her table, the one they'd built together, with the carved bird watching from the shelf and the stone pendant resting against her heart. The conversation was easy, comfortable, stories about childhoods in different countries, about loss and survival, about the small victories that added up to lives worth living. As darkness fell and Elias prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "This partnership," he said carefully, "it doesn't have to stay just about building projects. Could be about building a life, together, if you wanted." The question hung in the air between them. Lianhua knew what he was asking, knew what her answer would mean, not just companionship, but commitment, a future built jointly, not separately. She thought about her mother who'd sold everything for Lianhua to have choices, about the ocean crossing and the factory work and the months of brutal isolation, about the cabin rising log by log, about the moment when she'd stopped surviving and started living. "I would like that," she said. "Not now, not rushed, but someday, when we are both ready." Elias smiled, a real smile, full and genuine. "Someday works for me." The summer brought full growth. The garden flourished beyond expectation, producing beans and potatoes and onions in abundance. Lianhua preserved what she could and sold the excess in town, adding to her slowly growing savings. The embroidery lessons continued, and she'd started training Anne to teach the beginner class, freeing up time for her own work. Elias came by 3 or 4 times a week now, helping with projects or just sitting on the porch talking. Sometimes they worked in silence, the comfortable quiet of people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Sometimes they talked for hours, sharing histories and hopes. The town's acceptance grew warmer. When Lianhua walked the streets now, people greeted her by name. Not everyone. There were still those who looked away, who disapproved on principle, but enough that she felt seen, acknowledged, part of something larger than herself. In August, the community gathered for a barn raising at the Miller farm. Lianhua went, bringing food and her presence. She worked alongside the women, preparing meals and keeping water available for the men doing the heavy construction. But when the frame needed extra hands to raise, she grabbed a rope and pulled with everyone else. Her strength counted equally among the labor. Danny sought her out during the lunch break. "Pa wants to thank you," he said, "for teaching me. Says I'm better with wood than he expected. Wants to know if you'd consider taking me on as apprentice sometimes, when you need extra hands." Lianhua looked over at Sam Miller, who nodded in acknowledgement. An apprentice. Someone learning from her, trusting her knowledge. "Yes," she said. "I would be honored." That evening, as people were leaving, Evelyn pulled Lianhua aside. "You've done good here," she said. "Better than most of us thought possible. You changed this town, made us look at ourselves and not like what we saw, forced us to be better." "I did not set out to change anything. I just wanted to survive." "Sometimes surviving is the most revolutionary act there is." Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. "Keep surviving, Lian. Keep showing them what's possible." As autumn approached and the cottonwoods began to turn gold, Lianhua stood outside her cabin one evening and took stock. The garden had provided food for winter. The embroidery had provided income. The fence marked boundaries that were legally and morally hers. Elias's presence had become routine, expected, wanted. She'd built a life, not the one she'd imagined back in Guangdong, not the one her mother had dreamed of, but a real life, with roots and purpose and connection. The stone pendant rested cool against her skin, a reminder of endurance, of lasting through floods and ice and everything the world threw at you. In October, the first snow fell, just a dusting, melting by mid-morning, but a promise of winter to come. Lianhua was ready this time. The cabin was tight and warm, the woodpile stacked high. The root cellar was full of preserved food. She had money saved, warm blankets, a stove that worked perfectly. More than that, she had people. Elias, who came by almost daily now. The women from the embroidery lessons who stopped to check on her. Danny, eager to learn and help. The townspeople who'd slowly, grudgingly, then genuinely accepted her presence. She wasn't alone anymore. On the first truly cold day in November, exactly 1 year after she'd first moved into the cabin, Elias arrived with a proposal. "Winter's coming," he said. "And I've been thinking, my cabin's up on the mountain, yours is down here. Makes more sense for me to stay here, help you through the cold months. If you're willing." "Stay here?" Lianhua looked at him carefully. "In my cabin?" "If you'll have me. Not just visiting, actually staying, building a life here instead of just existing on that mountain." He met her eyes. "I'm ready for that, if you are." Lianhua thought about what it would mean. Sharing her space, her life, giving up the solitude she'd fought so hard to create. But solitude had never been the goal, just the safest option in a hostile world. The world was less hostile now, and Elias had proven over and over that he saw her as equal, as partner, as someone worth building beside. "Yes," she said. "Stay." That winter was nothing like the last. The cabin was warm with two people's presence, two people's work. They divided tasks naturally. Elias handled the heavy labor, Lianhua managed the cooking and embroidery income. But both of them did both things, trading off based on need and energy, and who was better suited for the task at hand. They talked through the long evenings, learning each other's rhythms and habits, discovering compatibility in shared silence and honest conversation. Building not just a household, but a partnership that felt equal and earned. Sometimes Lianhua would wake in the night and lie there listening to Elias breathe, marveling at how her life had changed. From the lean-to in the wilderness to this, a cabin, a partner, a place in a community that had learned to see her as human. Not every day was easy. There were still moments of prejudice, still people who made their disapproval known. There were arguments with Elias about small things that felt large when cabin fever set in. There were days when Lianhua missed her mother so acutely it hurt to breathe. But there were more good days than bad. Days when the embroidery work flowed easily. Days when the lessons went well. Days when Elias said something that made her laugh. Or when they worked together on a project with the easy coordination of people who knew each other deeply. As spring approached again, Lianhua realized she'd stopped thinking of herself as temporary. Stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, for permission to be revoked, for the town to decide she didn't belong after all. She belonged because she'd chosen to. Because she'd built something real and refused to let anyone take it away. Because she'd endured. In March, on a morning when the cottonwoods were just beginning to bud, Elias asked her to marry him. Not with flowery words or grand gestures, just a simple question over breakfast. "Been thinking," he said. "We should make this official, legal. Would you marry me?" Lianhua set down her coffee. She'd known this was coming, had been expecting it, but the reality still hit hard. "Why?" she asked. "Because I love you. Because you make me want to be better than just a man hiding on a mountain. Because I want to build something permanent with you." He paused. "Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I'd be honored to spend my life alongside you." Lianhua looked at him, this massive man who'd defended her when no one else would, who'd taught her to build, who'd chosen her as equal when the world said she was less. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." They married in April, in a simple ceremony at the cabin. Morrison performed it, the legal authority of his office making it binding. Martha and Mrs. Thompson stood as witnesses. Evelyn brought food. Danny brought his whole family. Half the town showed up, crowding into the small cabin and spilling onto the porch. Lianhua wore a dress she'd made herself, embroidered with phoenixes rising through clouds. The stone pendant rested against her throat. Elias wore his best clothes and looked uncomfortable but happy. The ceremony was short. No mention of faith or tradition, just legal words and witnessed promises. Then it was done, and they were married. Partners in law as well as practice. That evening, after everyone had left and the cabin was quiet again, Lianhua and Elias sat on the porch, watching the sunset over her land. Their land now, legally joined. You did it, Elias said. Everything you set out to do. Built a home, claimed land, made a life. We did it, Lianhua corrected. Not just me. No, this was you. I just helped along the way. He took her hand. You're remarkable, Lian. Don't ever forget that. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, feeling the stone pendant cool against her skin, feeling the weight of everything she'd survived and everything she'd built. My mother would be proud, she said quietly. Yeah, she would. The years that followed weren't perfect. There were hard winters and failed crops and arguments and grief. Elias's shoulder got worse with age, requiring Lianhua to take on more physical labor. She never fully lost her accent, never stopped being seen as foreign by some. The embroidery lessons eventually declined as fashions changed and women lost interest. But the cabin stood. The fence held. The land remained theirs, legally transferred to full ownership after 5 years of continuous residence. They built additions, a workshop for Elias, a proper room for embroidery, a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings. Danny Miller became a skilled carpenter, learning from both of them. He eventually built his own cabin on land adjacent to theirs, raising his family within sight of where he'd learned his trade. Other families settled nearby, drawn by the community that had slowly, imperfectly formed. Harmony Creek grew from a rough frontier town into something more established. Not genteel, not easy, but functional. A place where people could build lives if they were willing to work for it. Where foreign women could claim land and teach skills and marry mountain men without the world ending. Lianhua never went back to China, never saw Guangdong again or visited her mother's grave. That loss stayed with her, a permanent ache, but she built something her mother would have recognized, a life of purpose, of honest work, of dignity earned through persistence. She never forgot what it felt like to be alone, to be hated for existing, to have her work kicked across a dirty floor. Those memories shaped her, made her fierce in defending others who faced similar cruelty, made her quick to help newcomers, to teach skills freely, to use her hard-won position to make the path easier for those who came after. Because that was the point, she realized. Not just to survive, but to make survival possible for others. To show that the impossible could be done, and in doing so, make it a little less impossible for the next person. On a warm evening in late summer, perhaps 15 years after she'd first arrived in Harmony Creek, Lianhua sat on her porch with Elias. They were older now, grayer, slower, but still present, still building. You ever regret it? Elias asked. Leaving China? Coming here? Lianhua thought about it. About everything she'd lost, her mother, her language's daily use, the familiar rhythms of the only home she'd known for 25 years. About everything she'd endured, the mockery, the isolation, the near destruction of everything she'd built. But she also thought about this cabin, this land, this partnership, the women she'd taught, the community she'd helped shape, the proof that a person's worth wasn't determined by their origin, but by their actions. No, she said finally, no regrets. This life is hard, but it is mine. I chose it, built it. That is worth everything it cost. Elias squeezed her hand. Yeah, it is. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the Dakota hills, painting the sky in colors that reminded Lianhua of the silk panels she'd carried across an ocean. Phoenix fire, clouds that held both storms and sun, mountains that endured regardless of what fell upon them. The stone pendant was warm against her skin now, heated by her body after years of wearing. Still smooth, still lasting, like her. The world would keep turning, keep throwing challenges and heartbreak and unexpected kindness. But Lianhua had learned the fundamental truth of survival. You endured not by staying small and safe, but by choosing to build something larger than yourself. By connecting to people and place and purpose. By refusing to let cruelty define your worth. She'd come to America with nothing but her mother's sacrifice and her own stubborn determination. She'd built a life from those raw materials, adding skill and sweat and the grudging respect of people who'd learned to see past their own prejudices. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't smooth or perfect or easy, but it was real. It was hers. And as the last light faded and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Lianhua looked at her cabin, solid and warm and permanent, and knew that she'd done exactly what she'd set out to do. She'd survived. She'd built. She'd created a home in a place that hadn't wanted her. And in doing so, she'd proven that home wasn't something you were given. It was something you made, log by log, stitch by stitch, choice by choice. The smoke from her chimney rose straight and steady into the evening air. Inside, the stove burned warm. The floor held solid. The walls stood strong. Everything she'd built would outlast her, would remain as proof that one woman, foreign and alone, had claimed her piece of the world and refused to be erased. That was enough. That was everything. Lianhua smiled, squeezed Elias's hand, and watched the night settle over her land, over her home, over the life she'd fought for and won.